I stared at my reflection in the polished silver gravy boat, the distorted image mirroring exactly how I felt inside as I placed it on the Thanksgiving table. 16 years of marriage, and Richard and Diane Reynolds still looked at me like I was the help who somehow tricked their precious son into matrimony. The gravy boat itself was a passive-aggressive gift from Diane 3 Christmases ago, because every proper home needs proper serving pieces, dear. What she didn't know was that the antique silver she'd smugly presented had been a find from my own restaurant's kitchen renovation, sold off to a consignment shop where she'd overpaid for it by about 200%. Some secrets were too delicious to correct. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of my daughter's laughter broke through my thoughts. Lily was in the kitchen with Mark, their identical smiles catching the late afternoon sunlight as they mashed potatoes together. That sound, that was worth all the snide comments, all the backhanded compliments, all the years of proving myself to people who had decided my worth before ever knowing me. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane, running fashionably late as usual. Richard insists on bringing the Chateau Margaux. Hopefully it will elevate your menu. I took a deep breath and typed back, "No rush. Everything will be waiting. Including karma," I thought, slipping my phone into my pocket. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Table looks beautiful, Abs. Don't let them get to you today, okay?" I leaned back into his chest. 16 Thanksgivings, and they still think I'm after your inheritance. At what point do I get upgraded from gold digger to actual family member? "You're my family," he whispered into my hair. "You and Lily are everything." The doorbell rang, and I felt my shoulders tense. Mark squeezed my hand before heading to answer it. "Game face is on," he said with a wink. I straightened the last fork, adjusted the centerpiece of autumn flowers, not from Diane's preferred florist, but from my restaurant's garden, and prepared for battle. Richard and Diane Reynolds swept into our modest craftsman home like royalty visiting the colonies. Diane immediately handed me her designer coat, not even attempting to hide her critical scan of our living room. Richard carried a wine bottle, like it was a newborn child, carefully cradling the Chateau Margaux, a bottle that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. "Abigail," Diane air-kissed near both my cheeks. "That outfit is so, sensible. How practical of you." I smoothed the apron covering my carefully selected burgundy dress. "It's just until dinner's ready. I'd hate to ruin good clothes cooking." "Cooking?" Diane raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Darling, you should have catered. A holiday is no time for a hostess to be stuck in the kitchen." "Mom," Mark intervened, hugging his mother. "Abby's food puts any catering company to shame, you know that." Richard cleared his throat, holding up the wine. "Where should I put this? It needs to breathe properly." "I've already decanted a Pinot for dinner, Dad," Mark said. "From Abby's restaurant wine cellar. It's been getting rave reviews." "I'm sure it's adequate," Richard replied, his expression suggesting anything from our middle-class establishment couldn't possibly compare to his selection. Lily bounced into the room, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, flour dusting her cheek. "Grandpa! Grandma! Did you see my AP scores? I got them early, all 5s. Diane's face softened slightly. "That's the Reynolds intelligence showing through." I bit my tongue. Lily had inherited my math abilities and studied for weeks at our kitchen table while I quizzed her between restaurant shifts. But some battles weren't worth fighting. "Jack's running late," Richard announced, checking his Rolex. "Some emergency at the office. The Palmer acquisition is giving him trouble." "On Thanksgiving?" I asked. Richard's gaze hardened. "Real success doesn't take holidays, Abigail. Something your establishment might consider." "My establishment is closed today so my staff can be with their families," I replied evenly. "We're booked solid through December." "How quaint." Diane murmured, lifting a framed photo of Lily's science fair victory. I'm surprised you can turn a profit with such limited hours. Harvest Table just got nominated for a James Beard Award, Grandma, Lily piped up. Mom's restaurant is famous now. Diane's smile tightened. Well, it's a good hobby for Abigail to have. Something to keep her occupied while Mark supports the family. Mark coughed awkwardly. Actually, Mom, Abby's restaurant brings in more than my teaching salary these days. She's the breadwinner. The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost see the calculations happening behind Diane's eyes, reassessing, recategorizing, finding some way to diminish my success. Well, she finally said, it must be such a comfort to Mark, knowing he can pursue his teaching passion without financial worry. How fortunate that your little restaurant does well enough to subsidize his career choices. And there it was. In Diane's world, my success could only exist to benefit her son. It couldn't be my own achievement, my own dream realized through years of double shifts and rejected loan applications. It had to be reframed as Mark's good. Fortune in having a wife whose hobby supported his decision to leave his father's lucrative real estate firm. The doorbell rang again, saving me from responding. Lily raced to answer it. Uncle Jack! She squealed, and I heard the deep laugh of Mark's younger brother. Jack Reynolds entered carrying a bottle of champagne and a bouquet of flowers. Unlike his parents, Jack had always treated me like family. Despite working for his father's company, he had none of Richard's condescension or Diane's snobbery. Happy Thanksgiving, favorite niece, he said, handing Lily the flowers. And for the chef, he added, passing me the champagne with a wink. Dom Perignon, because anyone who puts up with this family deserves the good stuff. Jack, Richard admonished. That's hardly appropriate. What? Jack's innocence was clearly feigned. I'm just acknowledging that Abby's cooking deserves celebration. Have you tried her cranberry glazed duck? Life-changing. I smiled gratefully at my brother-in-law. It's good to see you, Jack. How's the Palmer deal going? Jack's expression flickered. It's complicated, but not today's problem. Today is for family and food. He clapped his hands together. Speaking of which, what can I do to help? You could open that champagne, I suggested. I think we could all use a glass before dinner. As Jack followed me to the kitchen, I heard Diane stage whisper to Mark, champagne before dinner? That's rather presumptuous for a Thursday meal. It's a celebration, Mom, Mark replied, his patience audibly wearing thin. Abby's restaurant nomination, Lily's AP scores, family being together, those are all worth celebrating. In the kitchen, Jack popped the cork with expert precision, keeping it from making a loud noise. Sorry about them, he muttered. They're extra tense today. Extra tense? I didn't think that was possible. I handed him glasses from the cabinet. What's going on? Jack hesitated, pouring the champagne. It's not my place to say. Jack? He sighed. The company's in trouble. That Palmer deal was supposed to save the quarter, but it's falling apart. Dad's over-leveraged on some properties, and with the market correction. He trailed off, then shook his head. But that's not your problem. I absorbed this information as I checked the turkey. The Reynolds family real estate empire in trouble? That explained the extra edge to Richard's disdain and Diane's snippiness. Does Mark know? I asked quietly. Dad would rather die than... Tell his school teacher's son that he's having financial problems, Jack replied, his voice equally low. Especially since Mark turned down the VP position last year. In Dad's mind, that's like rejecting a lifeline. The timer dinged, and I pulled out the roasted vegetables, their caramelized edges perfectly browned. Well, their financial problems aren't our concern, I said firmly. Mark is happy teaching history. He doesn't owe his father a career change. Jack raised his glass. To doing what you love, he toasted. You and Mark both had the courage to follow your passions instead of expectations. I admire that. We clinked glasses, and I felt a twinge of sympathy for Jack. Unlike Mark, he'd never escaped the gravity of Richard's expectations. He'd gone to the right schools, taken the right position at the company, dated the right women from the right families. Yet he seemed perpetually on the edge of his father's approval, never quite measuring up. "Dinner's ready," I announced, carrying the platter of turkey to the dining room. "Lily, can you grab the potatoes?" As everyone took their seats at the table, Richard at one end, naturally assuming the head position in someone else's home, I noticed Diane's gaze lingering on the gravy boat with a small, satisfied smile. I caught Mark's eye, and he gave me a subtle thumbs up of encouragement. "Everything looks wonderful, Abby," Jack said, spreading his napkin across his lap. "Indeed," Richard added, his tone suggesting surprise. Almost like a professional prepared it. I smiled sweetly. "That's probably because a professional did prepare it. I do run a restaurant, after all." Diane tittered nervously. "She means as a hobby, Richard. It's not like Abigail went to culinary school." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Actually, I did," I corrected her. "While working full-time as a financial advisor, 2 years at Portland Culinary after Lily started school." Richard reached for the wine, ignoring my carefully decanted Pinot Noir, and pouring himself a glass of his Chateau Margaux. "Well, it's good to have interests. Keeps idle hands busy." Mark cleared his throat. "I think we should say what we're thankful for before we eat." His voice carried the practiced authority of a high school teacher used to redirecting conversations. "I'll start. I'm thankful for my beautiful wife who somehow manages to run an award-nominated restaurant while still making time for our family." Lily grinned. "I'm thankful for Mom's mashed potatoes, and for Dad helping me with my college applications, and for not having to eat Grandma's green bean thing this year." "Lily," I admonished, though I had to suppress a smile. "It's a casserole, dear," Diane said tightly, a family recipe passed down through generations of Reynolds women. "More like passed over," Jack murmured into his wine glass, earning him a sharp look from his father. "I'm thankful for family traditions," Diane offered, pointedly ignoring Jack's comment, "and for the Reynolds name that has opened so many doors for all of us." Her gaze slid to me, some more deserving than others. The air in the room thickened. I took a deliberate sip of champagne. "I'm thankful for good investments," Richard said, swirling his wine. "Both in business and in family, though some investments take longer to show their returns than others." He looked meaningfully at Mark. "I'm thankful for authenticity," I said finally. "For people who value substance over status. For building something meaningful from scratch instead of riding on family connections." Richard's knuckles whitened around his glass. "A curious thing to be thankful for, considering how thoroughly you've benefited from those very connections. Your restaurant would hardly have its clientele without the Reynolds name attached, however peripherally." "Dad?" Mark started, but I placed my hand on his arm. "My restaurant succeeds because of the quality of the food and the experience we provide," I said calmly. "Our regulars come for the seasonal menu and sustainable practices, not because they're hoping to catch a glimpse of my in-laws." Jack raised his glass. "I'm thankful for Abby's food and for people brave enough to speak their minds. Can we eat before everything gets cold?" As dishes were passed and plates filled, the conversation mercifully shifted to safer topics. Lily's college prospects, the unseasonably dry November, Jack's new condo downtown. I was just starting to relax when Diane, delicately cutting her turkey into precise bites, lobbed her next grenade. "I ran into Catherine Palmer at the club yesterday. She mentioned her daughter is single again. Wasn't she in your class at Lakeside, Mark?" Mark paused mid-chew. "Emma Palmer? I haven't thought about her in 20 years, Mom. Such a lovely girl from an excellent family. She's a pediatric surgeon now." Diane sighed wistfully. She always had such a crush on you in high school. I'm sitting right here, Grandma, Lily pointed out, frowning. Oh, I know, darling. Diane patted Lily's hand. I'm just reminiscing about your father's past, before he made certain life choices. The implication hung in the air like a noxious cloud. I focused on cutting my food, refusing to take the bait. If by life choices you mean marrying the most incredible woman I've ever known and having an amazing daughter, then yes, I'm quite happy with those decisions, Mark replied, his voice deceptively light. Richard cleared his throat. Speaking of decisions, Mark, that position at the firm is still open. Reynolds Realty needs fresh blood, especially now. The offer stands, VP of Operations, starting salary twice what you make teaching. We've been through this, Dad. I'm not interested. Don't be hasty, Richard pressed. The market's tough right now. Having something solid to fall back on might be wise, especially with Lily heading to college soon. We've got Lily's college covered, I interjected. The restaurant is doing well, and I've maintained my investment portfolio. Richard laughed dismissively. A small restaurant's profits are hardly reliable for long-term planning. Markets change, trends fade. What's popular today could be bankrupt tomorrow. The irony of his statement, given what Jack had revealed about the Reynolds Company's financial troubles, wasn't lost on me, but I held my tongue. Actually, Mark said, setting down his fork, Abby's restaurant has shown consistent growth for 5 years straight. Her business model was sound enough to secure expansion financing last month. Diane nearly choked on her wine. Expansion? Whatever for? We're opening a second location in the Pearl District, I explained, unable to keep the pride from my voice. The investors were particularly impressed with our financials and concept. Investors? Richard scoffed. What kind of investors would back a small neighborhood restaurant? The kind who recognize a good opportunity, Jack chimed in. Actually, Dad, I put some money in myself. Abby's business plan was rock solid, better than half the proposals that cross your desk. Richard's face darkened as he turned to his younger son. You invested in her restaurant without consulting me? With what funds? My own money, Dad. From my trust fund. I'm 34, not 14. Irresponsible, Richard muttered, frittering. Away your inheritance on a vanity project. It's not a vanity project, Lily protested. Mom's restaurant employs 15 people and sources from local farms and… Lily, it's okay, I said softly. Your grandfather is entitled to his opinion. An opinion based on decades of business experience, Richard added. Something you lack, despite your financial advisor background. I took another sip of champagne. 7 years at Meridian. Wealth management before opening Harvest Table. But who's counting? Exactly, Diane interjected smoothly. Who is counting? The point is, Mark has an opportunity to rejoin the family business at a crucial time. A chance to secure his future, your future, instead of relying on… She waved her hand dismissively. At me? Unpredictable ventures. My unpredictable venture paid for this house, I said quietly, and funds Lily's private school tuition. And will cover her college expenses. A charged silence fell over the table. Mark reached for my hand under the tablecloth, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Well, Diane finally said with a brittle smile, I suppose we should be grateful that Mark's unconventional choice of partner at least turned out to be financially useful, though one does wonder what drew you to him initially, when he was fresh out of business school with such promising prospects at his father's firm. And there it was, the gold digger accusation, thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Before I could respond, Richard raised his glass. To practical arrangements, he said, his gaze sliding between Mark and me. However they may disguise themselves. Jack abruptly stood, his napkin falling to the floor. That's enough. Abby has done nothing but welcome you into her home and cook an amazing meal, and you've spent the entire time insulting her. Jackson, sit down, Richard commanded. This is family business. Abby is family, Jack shot back, more than you've ever treated her as. It's fine, Jack, I said, though my voice shook slightly. Richard and Diane are entitled to their perspectives, however misguided. See? Diane gestured toward me. So dramatic. We're simply expressing concern for our son's well-being. No, you're not, Lily said suddenly, her young face flushed with anger. You're being mean to Mom because you think she's not good enough. But she's better than both of you. Lily, Mark warned. But our daughter wasn't finished. Mom built her restaurant from nothing. She works harder than anyone I know. And she never, ever makes people feel small to make herself feel big. Diane's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. I think, I said carefully, standing and gathering my plate, that we should take a short break before dessert. Lily, help me in the kitchen, please. As my daughter followed me out of the dining room, I heard Mark's controlled voice addressing his parents. That was completely out of line. If you can't treat Abby with respect in our home, this will be the last holiday we spend together. In the kitchen, Lily's eyes were bright with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I shouldn't have said that. Stuff. I pulled her into a hug. You stood up for what's right. I'm proud of you. But sometimes the high road means walking away from the fight, not charging into it. They treat you like you're nothing, she mumbled against my shoulder. And you're everything. My heart swelled despite the tension. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. Jack appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression apologetic. I'm sorry about them, Abs. That was brutal, even by Reynolds standards. I shrugged, trying for nonchalance. 16. Years of practice makes it easier to handle. It shouldn't be something you have to handle at all, he said firmly. Look, there's something you should know. He was interrupted by a crash from the dining room, followed by raised voices. The three of us rushed back to find Richard standing, wine glass overturned, dark red liquid seeping into the white tablecloth. You ungrateful... Richard was pointing at Mark, his hand shaking. After everything we've done for you, the connections, the opportunities, the legacy we built. Done for me? Mark's voice was dangerously quiet. What exactly have you done except try to force me into a life I never wanted? A life that, by the way, appears to be collapsing under the weight of your poor decisions. Diane gasped. Mark, that's unfair. Your father has worked tirelessly. Stop, I interjected. Whatever this is about, it can wait until after Thanksgiving dinner. Richard turned his fury toward me. This is your influence. You've turned my son against his family, his birthright. You saw dollar signs the moment you met him, didn't you? A naive Reynolds heir with a trust fund, the perfect target. Dad, Mark shouted, that's enough. Is it? Richard continued, his composure completely gone now. She's pulled you away from everything that matters. Your career, your family, connections, your future in the business. And for what? So she could play restaurateur with family money. I felt a strange calm descend over me. After 16 years of subtle digs and backhanded compliments, there was something almost refreshing about Richard's unvarnished contempt. I didn't need Mark's money, I said evenly. I've supported myself since I was 18, put myself through college, built my career, started my business with a small business loan and my own savings, not a penny from the Reynolds fortune. A convenient story, Diane sniffed. It's not a story, it's documented fact, I continued. But you've never bothered to learn anything real about me because you decided who I was the moment Mark brought me home. A gold digger, a social climber, Someone beneath your precious family. Jack stepped forward. Mom, Dad, Abby's telling the truth. She refused even my investment until the second location expansion. She's done all of this herself. Loyalty to your brother is one thing, Richard sneered. Blind support of his wife's delusions is another. They're not delusions, Lily protested. Mom's restaurant is super successful. Everyone says so. Richard laughed harshly. Success is building something that lasts generations, not some trendy farm-to-table cafe that will be forgotten as soon as the next food fad comes along. Something inside me snapped. 16 years of restraint, of taking the high road, of letting their subtle cruelties slide for Mark's sake. All of it crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. You know what, Richard? You don't get to lecture anyone about success right now. I straightened to my full height. Not when Reynolds Realty is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy because of your risky investments. The room went deadly silent. Diane's face drained of color. Richard froze, his mouth half open. Abby, Jack whispered. How did you... I was a financial advisor for 7 years, I reminded him. I still have contacts in the industry. Did you think I wouldn't hear whispers about one of Portland's premier real estate developers being overextended? That I wouldn't research this company my husband's family built before deciding whether to accept their constant judgment of my choices? Richard collapsed back into his chair. This is private family business. So is Thanksgiving dinner, I countered. Yet you had no problem turning that into a public forum for questioning my integrity and motives. Mark was staring at his father. Is this true? Is the company in trouble? Richard wouldn't meet his son's eyes. Diane suddenly became very interested in adjusting her pearl necklace. The Palmer acquisition was supposed to fix everything, Jack explained quietly. But they pulled out last week after discovering some irregularities in the books. Irregularities? Mark echoed. Your father has been operating on increasingly thin margins for years, I said, leveraging one property to finance another, counting on ever-increasing valuations to cover the gaps. It works until it doesn't. And now it doesn't, Jack confirmed. We're facing a liquidity crisis. That's why Dad's been pushing so hard for you to come back, Mark. The banks want to see stability, family succession. They're more likely to extend terms if the heir apparent returns to the fold. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. So all this pressure, all these years of making Abby feel unwelcome, it wasn't just snobbery. It was because you needed me as a corporate asset. You make it sound so calculating, Diane protested weakly. We simply wanted what was best for you. For the family. This dinner, I said, the final piece clicking into place. The extra hostility, the job offer. You're not just unhappy with our lifestyle choices anymore. You need Mark to save your company. Richard's face hardened again. Whatever financial challenges Reynolds Realty may be facing, they're temporary. Every business has ups and downs. Unlike your little restaurant, we have decades of history, properties across 3 states, and debts to match, I added. Your temporary challenges include defaulting on the Riverside development loan, right? And the tax liens on the Westbrook properties? Those sound pretty serious to me. How dare you, Diane hissed. Our financial matters are none of your concern. They became my concern the moment you walked into my home and called me a gold digger, I replied, my voice steady despite the anger coursing through me. The moment you suggested my husband should abandon his calling to bail out your failing company. The moment you implied I married Mark for money, when the truth is, I'm the one who's been supporting this family financially for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily looked between us all, wide-eyed. Jack seemed somewhere between horrified and impressed. Mark placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice low and dangerous. You've made your point, Abigail. Apparently, you're not the penniless opportunist we took you for. Congratulations. But mark my words, when Reynolds Realty recovers, as it will, you'll regret this little display. I smiled, the weight of 16 years of unspoken resentment finally lifting from my shoulders. No, Richard, I don't think I will. Because unlike you, I don't measure success by the size of my bank account or the prestige of my address. I measure it by the respect I've earned, the business I've built with my own hands, and the family I come home to every night. I gestured to the table, to the meal I'd prepared, to my daughter and husband standing proudly beside me. This dinner, everything here, I paid for it. Not with inherited wealth or someone else's money, with my own hard work. Every bite you've taken came from the success you've spent years dismissing. I picked up the gravy boat, that smug gift from Diane, and turned it over in my hands. Even this came from my restaurant. Diane bought it from a consignment shop where I'd sold some excess kitchen items during our renovation last year. You paid triple what it's worth, by the way. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her throat. That's impossible. Check the bottom, I suggested. There's a small HT engraved on it. Harvest table. I mark all our serving pieces. As Diane snatched up the silver piece to examine it, Richard stood abruptly. This is outrageous. We've been nothing but generous to you, including you in family events despite your background. Generous? Mark laughed incredulously. You've belittled Abby at every opportunity, dismissed her achievements, treated her like an interloper for 16 years. And now we discover it was all because you were terrified she might actually be financially independent enough to support me in choosing a career outside your control. We should go, Diane announced stiffly, setting down the gravy boat as if it had burned her. Clearly, we're not welcome here. On the contrary, I said, my voice softening slightly. You're welcome as family, as Mark's parents and Lily's grandparents. What's not welcome is the judgment, the condescension, and the attempts to manipulate Mark back into a business that your mismanagement has driven to the brink. Richard grabbed his coat, his face a mask of barely contained rage. This isn't over. The Reynolds name still means something in this town. So does mine, I replied calmly. Chen Reynolds. The name on my restaurant, my business loans, and, yes, the deed to this house that my little restaurant paid for. As Richard and Diane moved toward the door, Jack remained seated, looking between his parents and us with a pained expression. I think I'll stay for dessert if that's okay, he finally said. Abby's pumpkin cheesecake is legendary. Richard glared at his younger son. Jackson, now. Jack shook his head. No, Dad, I'm staying. Maybe it's time we all started being honest with each other instead of pretending everything is fine when it isn't. The front door slammed moments later as Richard and Diane departed, leaving behind an almost palpable relief in their wake. Mark pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry, he whispered against my hair. All these years, and I never stood up to them the way I should have. You did today, I reminded him, when it counted most. Lily was already clearing the table, humming to herself. So, dessert time? Since the evil witch and her flying monkey are gone? Lily, I admonished, but I couldn't help laughing. Those are still your grandparents, despite everything. Jack helped gather plates, shaking his head ruefully. For what it's worth, I think you just gave them exactly what they needed, even if it's not what they wanted. No one has stood up to them like that in, well, ever. As we moved to the kitchen to serve dessert, I felt lighter than I had in years. The Thanksgiving disaster had also been a kind of liberation. No more pretending, no more walking on eggshells, no more accepting their subtle cruelties for the sake of family harmony. Mark slid his arm around my waist as I cut slices of cheesecake. "You know what I'm thankful for? Really thankful for?" he murmured. "What's that?" "That 16 years ago, I had the good sense to marry the smartest, strongest woman I've ever known, even if my parents were too blind to see how lucky that made me." I leaned into him, savoring the moment of truth and clarity that had been 16 Thanksgivings in the making. "I'm thankful too, for this family we've built, for the life we've chosen, for the truth that finally came to dinner." Jack raised his glass of champagne. "To the real success story in the Reynolds family, Abby Chen Reynolds, who not only paid for Thanksgiving dinner, but served it with a side of long overdue honesty." We clinked glasses, and for the first time since Richard and Diane had arrived, I felt truly at home in my own house. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's finally, after years of silence, speaking your truth out loud. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling floors. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and padded downstairs to make coffee. Last night's confrontation played on repeat in my mind as I measured grounds into the filter. Richard's fury, Diane's shock, the final slamming of the door, it had been cathartic in the moment. But now, in the gray light of morning, I wondered about the consequences. Not for me, I'd meant every word, but for Mark, for Lily, for the complex web of family relationships that, despite everything, still mattered. The coffee maker gurgled to life just as my phone buzzed with a text. I expected it to be from my sous chef about the restaurant's weekend prep, but instead saw Jack's name on the screen, damage control breakfast, Equinox Cafe in an hour? Just you and me. I hesitated, then replied, "I'll be there." Mark appeared in the doorway as I was pouring coffee, his hair rumpled, eyes still heavy with sleep. "You're up early," he observed, accepting the mug I handed him. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Jack wants to meet for breakfast." Mark's eyebrows rose. "Just you and Jack?" "Apparently." He took a thoughtful sip. "Damage control, I'm guessing." That's exactly what he called it. Mark leaned against the counter, studying me. "Are you okay?" "About last night, I mean." I considered the question seriously. I don't regret what I said. Maybe how I said some of it, but not the content. They had it coming. Mark's voice was firm. 16 years of subtle jabs and condescension. And then to find out they've been lying about the company's stability while criticizing your business. He shook his head. "I'm sorry I didn't shut it down sooner." I touched his cheek, feeling the morning stubble beneath my fingers. "You did when it mattered most. Besides, I'm a big girl. I can fight my own battles." "That you can," he agreed with a small smile. "So what do you think Jack wants?" "To play peacemaker, probably. He's always been caught in the middle." Mark nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "He has. Dad's never forgiven him for not being the perfect heir apparent, and he's never forgiven me for walking away completely." I glanced at the clock. 40 minutes until I needed to meet Jack. "I should get dressed. Will you check on Lily later?" She was pretty upset about everything. "She'll be fine," Mark assured me. "Our daughter has your backbone and my stubborn streak." Honestly, I think she enjoyed seeing someone finally stand up to Richard and Diane. Still, she shouldn't have to deal with family drama like that. Mark pulled me close, his coffee mug warm against my back. No one should. But if there's one thing I know about the Chen Reynolds household, it's that we face things together. Go meet Jack, hear him out. But remember, you don't owe my parents anything, least of all, an apology. An hour later, I slid into a booth across from Jack at Equinox Cafe, a trendy breakfast spot downtown. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and yesterday's subtle 5 o'clock shadow now a more pronounced scruff. "Rough night?" I asked, signaling for coffee. "You could say that." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. After the Thanksgiving from hell, I went back to the office to review some financial reports. Didn't leave until 3. "Jack, it's a holiday weekend." "Not when you're trying to save a sinking ship." He rubbed his face. "But that's not why I asked you here." The server arrived with coffee, and we both ordered avocado toast for me, a full breakfast platter for Jack. When she left, Jack leaned forward. "First, I want to apologize for my parents. What they said to you was inexcusable." "You don't need to apologize for them. Someone should." He stirred his coffee absently. "They've been awful to you for years, but yesterday was something else entirely." I wrapped my hands around my mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. "Look, I know you're here to broker peace, to get me to extend an olive branch or make the first conciliatory move. But I can't do that, Jack. Not this time." To my surprise, he shook his head. "That's not why I asked you here. I'm not expecting you to make amends." "Then what?" Jack glanced around, lowering his voice. "I need your help, professionally." I blinked. "My help? With what?" "The company's finances." He looked deadly serious. "You were right yesterday. Reynolds Realty is in trouble. Serious trouble. Dad's been making increasingly risky investments for years, borrowing against existing properties to finance new acquisitions, counting on ever-rising values to cover the gaps. And now the market's correcting," I supplied. "Exactly. We're facing a liquidity crisis, margin calls on loans, and Dad's response has been to double down on even riskier ventures." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I've been trying to implement controls, develop a restructuring plan, but he blocks me at every turn. He still sees me as the kid brother who doesn't understand real business." Our food arrived, and we paused, while the server arranged our plates. When she left, I asked, "Why me, Jack? I'm the last person your father would listen to, especially after last night." "Not directly," he clarified. "I need someone with financial expertise to help me develop a rescue plan for the company. Someone who understands business structures but isn't emotionally invested in the Reynolds legacy. Someone who won't be intimidated by my father's bluster. Someone expendable if it all goes wrong," I added wryly. Jack had the grace to look chagrined. It's fine," I interrupted. "I understand the position you're in, but I need to know exactly what you're asking of me." He took a deep breath. "I need you to look at our books, all of them, including the ones Dad doesn't show the board. I need your analysis of our actual financial position and your recommendations for restructuring. And I need your discretion." I set down my fork. "You want me to review financial records your father is deliberately concealing? That's potentially illegal, Jack." "Not if I'm authorized to share them, which I am. As CFO, I have access to all company records." He leaned forward. "Look, I know I'm asking a lot, especially after how they've treated you. But this isn't just about Richard and Diane anymore. We employ over 200 people across 3 states. If Reynolds Realty goes under, those families lose their livelihoods." I considered his request. My first instinct was to refuse, to keep my distance from the Reynolds family drama. But Jack had always been kind to me, had stood up for me yesterday when it counted. "If I do this," I said slowly, "I need complete transparency. No hidden agendas, no using me as a scapegoat if things go south." "Absolute transparency," he agreed quickly. "And Mark needs to know. I won't keep secrets from my husband, even about his family's business." Jack nodded. "Of course. I was planning to talk to him myself." "One more condition," I added. "I do this as a professional consultant, with a contract and a fee." His eyebrows shot up. "You want to charge your family for help?" "Reynolds Realty isn't my family, Jack. It's a business. And if I'm going to provide professional services, I expect professional treatment. That includes compensation for my time and expertise. I held his gaze steadily. If your father found out I worked for free, he'd dismiss my input entirely. This way, there's skin in the game on both sides. Jack studied me for a long moment, then slowly smiled. You know, Abby, my parents never understood how lucky Mark was to find you. You're not just kind and resilient, you're smart as hell. Is that a yes to my conditions? It's a yes. He pulled out his phone. I'll have a consulting agreement drawn up today. Standard rates for financial advisory work. Make it 20% above standard, I corrected. Hazard pay for dealing with Richard Reynolds. Jack actually laughed at that. Fair enough. As we finished our breakfast, Jack filled me in on the general state of the company. The failed Palmer acquisition, the over-leveraged properties, the dwindling cash reserves. It was worse than I'd suspected, but not beyond saving with the right strategy. There's one more thing you should know, Jack said as we waited for the check. Dad's calling an emergency family meeting tonight at the house in Lake Oswego. He wants Mark there. My stomach tightened. To pressure him about joining the company again? Partially, but also because... Jack hesitated. Dad's considering restructuring ownership. Currently, the company is divided between him, me, Mark, and Lily, though her shares are in a trust until she's 21. He's talking about reallocating. Taking away Mark's shares because he won't join the family business, I translated. And Lily's too, potentially. Dad's argument is that the shares should go to active participants in the company. Anger flared hot and immediate. He can't touch Lily's trust. That was established by your grandfather. Legally, you're right, but Dad's been making noises about challenging the trust's terms based on changed circumstances. Jack shook his head. It's a desperate move, one that would tie up the shares in litigation for years. But he's not thinking rationally right now. Does Mark know about this? Not yet. I wanted to tell you first, so you'd have time to process before the meeting. I felt a headache forming behind my eyes. When were you planning to mention this family meeting? After I agreed to help you? Abby, it's not like that. The meeting was just called this morning. Dad texted while I was waiting for you. I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. This is exactly why I've kept my distance from Reynolds Realty. Every conversation has hidden agendas. Every decision is tangled in family politics. I know, Jack acknowledged, and I wouldn't ask for your help if I had any other options. But right now, you're the only person with the financial expertise and the courage to stand up to my father. Fine, I'll look at the books, and we'll attend the family meeting. I stood, gathering my purse. But Jack, if your father tries to use my involvement as leverage against Mark or Lily, all bets are off. I'll walk away and take my husband and daughter with me. He nodded solemnly. Understood. I'll email you the files this afternoon. As I drove home, my mind was already analyzing the situation, breaking it down into components the way I'd been trained to do. Reynolds Realty needed liquidity, debt restructuring, and probably asset divestiture, none of which Richard would welcome. All of which would require someone to stand firm against his intimidation tactics. Could I be that person? The rational part of me knew I had the skills. My years at Meridian Wealth Management had included helping several businesses through restructuring. But the personal entanglements made this different. This wasn't just any company. This was the source of Richard's identity, his pride, his sense of superiority. Dismantling any part of it would feel to him like a personal attack, especially coming from me. Mark was in the garden when I returned, turning the compost heap with a pitchfork. Gardening was his stress relief, his way of processing difficult emotions through physical labor. From the vigor of his movements, I could tell he was still working through yesterday's revelations. How was Jack? he asked, pausing to wipe his brow. Worried, tired. I leaned against the fence. The company's in worse shape than we thought. Mark drove the pitchfork into the ground. And let me guess, he wants my help. Not exactly. He wants mine. His eyebrows shot up. Yours? In what capacity? I explained Jack's request, my conditions, and the family meeting scheduled for that evening. As I spoke, Mark's expression shifted from surprise to concern to resignation. Dad's threatening my shares and Lily's trust, he said flatly when I finished. That's a new low, even for him. Jack thinks it's desperation, not malice. With Richard Reynolds, it's always both. Mark picked up his gardening gloves. What do you want to do? Professionally speaking, I should help. The situation is salvageable with the right strategy, and Jack's right about the employees who would be affected. I crossed my arms against the November chill, but personally, I want to stay as far away from Reynolds Realty as possible. Mark studied me thoughtfully. You're going to help anyway, aren't you? I haven't decided yet. Yes, you have. He smiled slightly. You wouldn't be Abby Chen if you turned your back on people who need your expertise even if they don't deserve it. I sighed, knowing he was right. If I do this, you know your father will find a way to twist it. He'll see it as me overstepping, inserting myself into family business where I don't belong. Probably, Mark agreed. But he'll also have to acknowledge that he needs you. That might be worth the price of admission alone. The thought of Richard Reynolds having to rely on my financial acumen did hold a certain poetic justice. After years of dismissing my career, my business sense, my very worth as Mark's partner, he would be forced to recognize my value, even if only to save his own legacy. What about the family meeting tonight? I asked. Are you ready to face them again so soon? Mark pulled me close, not caring that his clothes were dirty from gardening. After yesterday, I feel like I can face anything as long as we're in it together. You stood your ground against 16 years of subtle cruelty. I think I can handle one more difficult conversation. Even if it means potentially losing your shares in the company? Abby, I've never cared about those shares. They were my father's way of keeping me tethered to a future I never wanted. He kissed my forehead. The only investments I care about are the ones we've built together. Our home, Lily's education, your restaurant. Those are worth fighting for. Reynolds Realty is just a company with my name on it. His words warmed me despite the chilly air. You really mean that, don't you? Every word. He released me with a gentle squeeze. Now, I should shower before Lily gets back from her friend's house, and you should probably start looking at whatever files Jack sends over. You trust me to handle this? Mark's expression softened. Abby, I trust you with everything. My life, my happiness, and yes, even my dysfunctional family's failing business. If anyone can navigate this mess, it's you. 3 hours later, I sat at our home office desk, surrounded by financial statements, loan documents, and property valuations. Jack had been thorough, sharing everything from official annual reports to Richard's private notebooks tracking unofficial arrangements with investors. The picture they painted was grim. Reynolds Realty had been operating with increasingly thin margins for years, leveraging each successful property to finance the next acquisition, counting on market appreciation to cover shortfalls. It had worked during the boom years, allowing Richard to build an impressive portfolio and reputation. But when the market cooled, the strategy became unsustainable. The failed Palmer acquisition, which would have injected much-needed capital, was merely the final straw, not the cause of the crisis. I was deep in spreadsheet analysis when Lily burst into the office, back from her friend's house, cheeks flushed from the cold. Mom, guess what? Zoe's parents invited me to go skiing with them over winter break. Can I go, please? She flopped dramatically into the second desk chair, then noticed my work. "What's all this?" "Financial statements for Grandpa's company," I answered, saving my work before giving her my full attention. "Uncle Jack asked for my help." Lily's eyes widened. "Because of what happened at Thanksgiving?" "Partly. The company's in trouble, and he thinks I might have some solutions." She considered this, twirling a strand of hair around her finger in a gesture so reminiscent of Mark that it made my heart squeeze. "Are you going to help them, even after how mean they were to you?" I leaned back in my chair. "What do you think I should do? Honestly? Tell them to shove it." She grinned, then grew serious. "But that's not what you're going to do, is it? Because you're you." "And who am I, exactly?" "Someone who helps people even when they don't deserve it." She shrugged. "It's annoying sometimes, but also kind of amazing." I laughed. "Thanks, I think." "So we're going to bail out Grandpa's company?" "I'm going to offer some professional advice. Whether they take it is up to them." I studied my daughter's face, so open and perceptive. "There's a family meeting tonight at Grandpa and Grandma's house. You don't have to come if you don't want to." Lily straightened her shoulders. "I'm going. I want to make sure they don't try to bully you and Dad again." "This isn't your battle to fight, sweetheart." "Family sticks together," she said firmly. "That's what you always say. Besides, I want to see Grandpa's face when you tell him how to fix his company." I couldn't help smiling at her loyalty. "It won't be that simple. Your grandfather is proud, and he's not going to easily accept advice from me. Then he's stupid as well as mean," she declared with the absolute certainty of a 16-year-old. "Lily," I admonished gently, "he's still your grandfather. Complicated family relationships are part of life." She rolled her eyes. "Fine, but I'm still coming tonight, and about that ski trip. We'll talk about it later," I promised. "Right now, I need to finish this analysis before we leave for the meeting." After Lily bounced out of the office, I returned to my work with renewed focus. By late afternoon, I had a clearer picture of Reynolds Realty's situation and the beginnings of a restructuring plan. It would require significant changes: asset sales, debt renegotiation, management restructuring, but the company could survive if Richard was willing to swallow his pride and accept a diminished, though still substantial, portfolio. Mark appeared in the doorway as I was printing my findings. "How bad is it?" "Not irredeemable," I answered honestly. "But Richard will hate the solutions. They involve downsizing, selling properties he considers crown jewels, and being more transparent with investors than he's comfortable with." "Sounds like exactly what the company needs," Mark observed, "and exactly what my father will resist. Hence my trepidation about this meeting." Mark crossed to my desk, glancing over the papers. "You've done amazing work here, Abby. In just a few hours, you've broken down problems that Jack and his team have been struggling with for months. I have the advantage of professional distance and not being afraid of your father." I gathered the documents into a folder. "We should get ready. Jack texted that dinner will be served at 7, meeting to follow." "Dinner?" Mark groaned. "I didn't realize we'd have to sit through another meal with them so soon." "Consider it a test of intestinal fortitude, though I suspect no one will have much appetite." An hour later, our family pulled up to the imposing Reynolds mansion in Lake Oswego. The house where Mark had grown up was a sprawling Tudor-style residence on 2 manicured acres, complete with a view of the lake and a 4-car garage showcasing Richard's collection of luxury vehicles. I'd always found the place oppressively formal, as if it were designed for show rather than comfortable living. "Home sweet home," Mark muttered as we walked up the flagstone path to the front door. "This place always reminds me of a museum," Lily observed. "Like, if you touch anything, an alarm will go off." "That's not far off," Mark replied. "My mother used to follow the housekeepers around with white gloves, checking for dust." Jack opened the door before we could ring the bell, his expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Thank God you're here. Dad's been pacing since 5 and Mom's on her 3rd martini. Promising start, I murmured as we stepped into the marble-floored foyer. The house was unnaturally quiet. Usually, Diane had classical music playing through the built-in speaker system, Bach or Mozart, never anything as pedestrian as Beethoven. Tonight, the silence accentuated the tension in the air. Richard and Diane waited in the formal living room, a space so perfectly arranged it looked like a furniture showroom. Richard stood with his back to us, staring out the window at the darkening grounds. Diane perched on the edge of an antique settee, martini glass in hand, her posture rigid despite the alcohol. "They're here," Jack announced unnecessarily. Richard turned slowly. He looked older than he had at Thanksgiving, the lines in his face deeper, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Diane didn't rise to greet us, merely inclined her head in acknowledgement. Mark, Abigail, Lily. Richard's gaze swept over us, lingering briefly on the folder in my hands. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Mark's hand found mine, squeezing lightly. Jack said it was important. "It is." Richard gestured to the seating area. "Please sit down. We have much to discuss." As we arranged ourselves, Mark and I on the sofa, Lily in an armchair, Jack hovering near his father, an uncomfortable silence descended. Richard seemed to be gathering his thoughts, or perhaps his courage. "I believe we owe you an apology," he finally said, the words clearly difficult for him. "Our behavior at Thanksgiving was inappropriate." I glanced at Mark, surprised. Richard Reynolds didn't apologize. Not sincerely, anyway. "It was," Mark agreed, voice neutral. "But I suspect that's not why you called this meeting." Richard's jaw tightened. "No. Though the timing is unfortunate. I would have preferred to address family business without the complication of yesterday's unpleasantness." "Complication?" I couldn't help repeating. "Is that what you call accusing me of being a gold digger after 16 years of marriage?" "Abigail," Diane spoke for the first time, her voice slightly slurred. "We were upset. People say things they don't mean when they're upset." "Did you not mean it, Diane?" Because it sounded like the culmination of 16 years of barely disguised contempt. "Mom," Lily warned, sensing the rising tension. Richard held up a hand. "We're getting off track. I called this meeting to discuss Reynolds Realty and its future." "The future you want to remove me and Lily from," Mark stated bluntly. Richard's eyes flashed to Jack, who straightened his shoulders. "I told them, Dad. They deserved to know before this meeting." "I see." Richard's tone was cold. "Then you've also shown Abigail our financial records, I presume, against my explicit instructions about confidentiality?" "As CFO, I have the authority to consult with financial advisors," Jack replied evenly. "Abby has signed a consulting agreement with proper non-disclosure provisions." Richard turned his displeasure toward me. "And now you believe you understand my company better than I do? After a few hours with spreadsheets?" I met his gaze steadily. "I understand the numbers, Richard, and they tell a very clear story. Reynolds Realty is on the brink of insolvency due to persistent overleveraging, declining asset values, and mismanagement of cash flow." "How dare you?" he began, but I continued, opening my folder. "The Riverside development alone has negative equity of $12 million. The Westbrook properties are underwater after the tax liens, and the Palmer acquisition would have drained another $20 million in capital you don't have." I laid out the documents on the coffee table. "These aren't opinions, Richard. They're facts, drawn from your own records." A tense silence followed. Jack looked between his father and me, anxious but determined. Mark watched Richard carefully, like someone monitoring an unpredictable animal. Lily's eyes were wide, taking in the adult drama unfolding before her. "Even if what you say is accurate," Richard finally responded, his voice tight, it doesn't give you the right to interfere in family business decisions. Like removing Mark and Lily from company ownership? I challenged. That decision is about protecting the company's future. Shares should belong to those actively contributing to operations. Mark leaned forward. Just say it plainly, Dad. You want to punish me for choosing teaching over real estate, and you want to punish Lily because she's my daughter and Abby's. This isn't about punishment, Richard insisted, though his expression suggested otherwise. It's about survival. Reynolds Realty needs committed leadership, not passive shareholders. And you think cutting out your son and granddaughter is the answer? I asked incredulously. Rather than addressing the actual financial problems? The financial problems can be managed, Richard snapped, with the right strategy and the right team. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The right strategy? Richard, you've been implementing the wrong strategy for years. That's why you're in this position. Abby, Jack cautioned, but I was done tiptoeing around Richard's ego. No, Jack, it's time for honesty. I faced Richard directly. Your approach, leveraging properties beyond their value, counting on perpetual appreciation, hiding financial weaknesses from investors, it's not just unsustainable. In some cases, it borders on fraudulent. Richard's face flushed dark red. How dare you accuse me? It's not an accusation, it's an observation. One that any regulator would make if they examined your books. I tapped the documents on the table. You need a complete restructuring, selling non-performing assets, renegotiating loans, possibly even bringing in outside investors. None of which involves stripping Mark and Lily of their rightful shares. Those shares are mine to allocate as I see fit, Richard growled. The company bylaws. Actually, they're not, Mark interrupted. Jack and I reviewed the bylaws together last year. You need a 75% vote to reallocate shares. Between my shares, Lily's trust, and Jack's, you can't reach that threshold without our agreement. Richard's gaze switched to Jack, betrayal evident in his expression. You conspired against me? My own sons? We protected ourselves, Jack corrected, and the company, because we could see this coming. You, using share reallocation as a weapon when you didn't get your way. Diane set down her martini glass with a sharp click. This is exactly why family and business shouldn't mix. Look at what it's done to us. Richard, perhaps we should consider Jack's suggestion about the outside consultants. Consultants? I glanced at Jack questioningly. He nodded slightly. I proposed bringing in a restructuring firm. Dad refused. Because we don't need outsiders. Telling us how to run our family business, Richard insisted. But you need me to return to the company? Mark asked skeptically. Someone who's been teaching history for the past decade? You understand the Reynolds philosophy, our values, our approach to business. The approach that's driven the company to the brink of bankruptcy? Mark shook his head. Dad, I can't help you, not in the way you want, but Abby can. Richard's gaze snapped to me, suspicion evident. Absurd. She has no experience with commercial real estate. She has extensive experience with financial restructuring, Mark countered. At Meridian, she helped several companies through situations just like this. And she understands family businesses, the emotional complexities, the legacy considerations. I don't need lessons in my own business from someone who runs a restaurant, Richard sneered. A successful restaurant, Lily piped up, unable to stay silent any longer. With 2 locations and a James Beard nomination. What awards has Reynolds Realty won lately, Grandpa? Besides most likely to go bankrupt? Lily, I warned, though I couldn't help a flicker of pride at her fierce defense. Richard turned his attention to his granddaughter, his expression softening slightly despite her impertinence. He'd always had a soft spot for Lily, even while criticizing my parenting choices. Your loyalty to your mother is admirable, he said, but you don't understand the complexities of the situation. I understand that you're trying to take away my trust fund because you're mad at my parents, Lily shot back. That seems pretty simple to me. Not your trust fund, Richard corrected. Your shares in the company. The trust itself would be unaffected. Those shares are her inheritance, Mark interjected. A connection to her Reynolds heritage that you're threatening to sever because of your issues with me and Abby. Richard's shoulders sagged, a rare display of vulnerability. The company is my legacy, Mark. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for. I can't watch it crumble. Then let us help, I said quietly. Not as family members with complicated history, but as professionals with relevant skills. Let me develop a proper restructuring plan. Let Jack implement the necessary financial controls, and let Mark and Lily retain their rightful ownership shares. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Richard asked suspiciously. A standard consulting fee, which I've already negotiated with Jack. And the satisfaction of knowing I helped save 200 jobs. I met his gaze directly. Contrary to what you believe, Richard, I don't wish to see you fail. I don't want your employees to suffer because of poor management decisions. And I don't want Lily to lose her connection to her family heritage. A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard and I locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke. If, and I stress if, I were to consider your involvement, it would be temporary. Advisory only. All final decisions would remain with me. That's not going to work, Jack said before I could respond. Dad, you need to face reality. Your decisions have put us in this position. Continuing with business as usual isn't an option. You too, Jackson? Richard's voice held a note of betrayal. My own son. Especially me, Jack replied firmly. I've been trying to warn you for years about the risks we were taking. You dismissed my concerns as weakness, as lack of vision. But I was right, and now we're facing the consequences. Both of my sons turning against me, Richard muttered. After everything I've sacrificed to build this company for you. We're not turning against you, Mark said, his voice gentler than I expected. We're trying to save what can be saved, but it requires you to admit mistakes and accept help, even from people you've traditionally looked down on. Richard's gaze shifted between his sons, then to me, and finally to Lily. Something in his expression changed, a subtle softening, a glimmer of recognition. The meal is getting cold, Diane announced suddenly, standing with careful precision despite her martinis. Perhaps we should continue this discussion over dinner. A classic Diane Reynolds deflection, Mark murmured in my ear as we followed her toward the dining room. I squeezed his hand in response. The battle lines had been drawn more clearly than I'd expected. Richard was backed into a corner, and cornered men were unpredictable, especially proud, wealthy men unaccustomed to being challenged. As we took our seats at the formal dining table, a massive mahogany piece that could comfortably seat 16, I caught Jack's eye across the polished surface. He gave me a small nod of encouragement. Round 1 had gone better than expected, but the real test was yet to come. Richard Reynolds didn't surrender easily, and I had no illusions about the difficulty of the path ahead. Wine? Diane offered, already pouring without waiting for responses. Mark covered his glass with his hand. None for me, thanks. I'm driving. Suit yourself, she murmured, filling her own glass generously. The first course arrived, butternut squash soup served in delicate china bowls. We ate in uncomfortable silence, the only sounds the occasional clink of spoons against bowls, and Diane's too frequent sips of wine. Richard broke the silence as the main course was served, prime rib with roasted vegetables, prepared by the housekeeper who'd been with the Reynolds family for decades. Jack tells me your restaurant is opening a second location, he said, addressing me directly for the first time since we'd moved to the dining room. I nodded, wary of his sudden interest. In the Pearl District. We sign the lease next week. Commercial real estate in the Pearl doesn't come cheap. Your restaurant must be doing well. It is, I confirmed. We've shown consistent growth for 5 years, even during the downtown renovation phase that affected foot traffic. Richard cut his meat with precise movements. And you secured outside investment for this expansion? Jack mentioned he contributed. A small group of investors, yes, though the majority stake remains with me. Richard chewed thoughtfully. Perhaps there are some parallels between our situations after all. A successful business seeking expansion capital, managing investor expectations. I set down my fork. The difference, Richard, is that my business expansion is based on proven success and conservative projections, not wishful thinking. Richard's jaw tightened as he reached for his wine. 40 years in real estate isn't wishful thinking, Abigail. It's experience. Experience that should have taught you the dangers of over-leveraging, I countered. Yet here we are. Mark placed a hand on my arm, a gentle reminder to dial back the confrontation. I took a deep breath. This wasn't about winning arguments. It was about finding a path forward. What I meant, I continued in a more measured tone, is that our situations are different. Harvest Table is expanding from a position of strength. Reynolds Realty needs to contract before it can grow again. Contract? Richard repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. Reynolds doesn't contract. We expand. We grow. That's how I built this company from nothing. You didn't build it from nothing, Richard, Diane said unexpectedly. Your father gave you the seed money and your first 3 clients. Richard stared at his wife, clearly surprised by her contradiction. Diane rarely challenged him publicly. That's beside the point, he said after a moment. The principle remains. Reynolds Realty has always moved forward, never backward. Sometimes you have to take a step back to move forward, Jack pointed out. That's what Abby's analysis is showing. Richard's attention returned to me. And what exactly does your analysis recommend? Selling off properties my family has held for generations? Laying off loyal employees? Admitting defeat? Strategic realignment, I corrected. Selling underperforming assets, restructuring debt, streamlining operations. Yes, there would be some downsizing, but with the goal of building a sustainable enterprise, one that could grow again but from solid foundations. And who would implement this realignment? Richard's tone was skeptical. You. No, that would be Jack's role as CFO. I would simply provide the framework and recommendations. Richard studied me, his expression unreadable. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing his pride against the reality of his situation, the sting of accepting my help against the potential benefits. Let me be clear, he said finally. I'm not agreeing to anything yet, but if I were to consider your input, I would need to see a detailed proposal, numbers, projections, specific recommendations. I can have that for you by the end of the week, I replied, surprised by his willingness to even consider my involvement. Tomorrow, he countered. If this situation is as urgent as you claim, we can't afford to wait. I blinked. Tomorrow is Saturday. Financial crises don't observe weekends, Abigail. Richard's tone was dismissive. If you're not prepared to put in the necessary effort, I'll have it for you tomorrow, I interrupted. 10 a.m. at your office. Lily, who had been watching this exchange with fascinated attention, spoke up. Does this mean you're not going to try to take away my shares anymore, Grandpa? Richard shifted uncomfortably. That decision would depend on the viability of any restructuring plan and on your interest in the company's future. I'm interested, Lily said firmly. I might want to study business in college, and even if I don't, it's still my heritage, my connection to the Reynolds name. Something flickered in Richard's expression, surprise perhaps, or a reluctant respect. You sound like your father at your age, before he decided history books were more important than building something real. Teaching is building something real, Mark said quietly. Just not something you can put your name on or sell for a profit. Richard waved a hand dismissively. We've had this argument before. It's not relevant to the current discussion. It's entirely relevant, I disagreed. Your inability to see value in paths different from your own is exactly what's created this family tension. The same rigid thinking that's now threatening the company. Careful, Abigail, Richard warned. I'm willing to consider your professional input, not personal critiques of my character. The two are connected, I insisted. Your business decisions reflect your personal values. Your prioritization of appearance over substance, growth over stability, control over collaboration. Those values have shaped Reynolds Realty's current predicament. That's enough, Diane interjected, her words slightly slurred. This is supposed to be a family dinner, not an interrogation. Jack cleared his throat. Mom's right. Let's table the business discussion until tomorrow. Dad has agreed to review Abby's analysis. That's progress. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I focused on my meal, though my appetite had vanished. Beside me, Mark radiated tension, his posture rigid. Lily, Diane said suddenly, clearly attempting to change the subject. Jack tells me you're considering Stanford for college. Their business program is excellent. Actually, I'm leaning toward Berkeley, Lily replied. Their environmental science program is more what I'm interested in. Environmental science? Diane's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. But I thought you were just saying you might study business. I'm keeping my options open. And anyway, sustainable business practices are the future. Lily glanced at Richard. Maybe that's something Reynolds Realty should consider. Green building initiatives, eco-friendly developments. It could be a new direction after the restructuring. I suppressed a smile at my daughter's diplomatic attempt to bridge her interests with her grandfather's business. Richard, too, seemed momentarily disarmed by her suggestion. That's not entirely without merit, he admitted grudgingly, though the initial costs can be prohibitive. But the long-term returns are better, Lily countered, and there are tax incentives, plus the marketing advantages. Richard studied his granddaughter with new interest. You've researched this? For a school project, she acknowledged. I used Reynolds Realty as my case study, hypothetically exploring how a traditional development company could transition to sustainable practices. I'd be interested to see that project, Richard said, and I detected a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. I can email it to you, Lily offered. There are some cool graphs showing the projected ROI on different green initiatives. For the first time that evening, Richard's expression softened into something approaching warmth. I'd like that. The tension in the room eased slightly as dessert was served, a chocolate torte that even I had to admit was exceptional. As we ate, the conversation drifted to safer topics. Jack's new condo downtown, a charity gala Diane was organizing, Lily's debate team victories. By the time coffee was served in the formal living room, a tentative truce seemed to have been established. Richard had agreed to review my restructuring proposal. Lily had established a potential area of connection with her grandfather. No voices had been raised for at least 45 minutes. It was as close to a successful family gathering as we could have hoped for under the circumstances. We should get going, Mark announced as 9 o'clock approached. Lily has debate. Practice early tomorrow. Richard nodded, standing with the formal rigidity that characterized his physical movements. Jack, walk them out. I need a word with your mother. As we gathered our coats in the foyer, Jack pulled me aside while Mark helped Lily with her scarf. Thank you, he said quietly, for coming tonight, for agreeing to help despite everything. Don't thank me yet, I warned. Your father hasn't committed to anything, and my recommendations won't be easy for him to swallow. But he's willing to listen, That's more than I expected. Jack glanced toward the living room where his parents remained. I think yesterday's confrontation actually helped, in a strange way. It shocked him out of his usual patterns. Let's hope that shock lasts through tomorrow's meeting. I buttoned my coat. I'll need complete access to all current financial records, not just the historical data you sent earlier. You'll have it. I'll email everything tonight and be at the office early to help you with anything else you need. Mark joined us, his expression questioning. Everything okay? Just confirming details for tomorrow, Jack explained. I'll see you both at the office at 10. As we drove home through the dark, rain-slicked streets, a contemplative silence filled the car. Finally, Lily spoke from the back seat. That was intense, but also kind of productive, in a weird way. Mark glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What makes you say that? Well, Grandpa actually listened to Mom, and he seemed interested in my project. That's new, right? Very new, I agreed. Though I wouldn't count on it lasting. Your grandfather has spent a lifetime being the unquestioned authority in his world. That doesn't change overnight. But it could change, Lily insisted. People can change. Isn't that what you always say, Dad? Mark smiled slightly. I do say that, though I usually apply it to my students, not to Richard Reynolds. Well, maybe he's finally in your classroom, I murmured, gazing out at the passing streetlights. Nothing teaches lessons like necessity. Back home, while Mark helped Lily prepare for her debate practice, I set up in our office and dove back into Reynolds Realty's financials. Jack's promised email arrived containing the latest data: bank statements, loan documentation, investor agreements. The picture they painted was even more troubling than I'd initially assessed. Not only was the company over-leveraged, but Richard had also been engaging in increasingly questionable accounting practices to mask the extent of the problems. Nothing explicitly illegal, but dancing right up to the ethical line, recognizing revenue prematurely, deferring expenses inappropriately, classifying loans as investments to improve the balance sheet. I worked late into the night, building a comprehensive restructuring model. Properties were categorized by performance, debt obligations organized by urgency, cash flow projections extended under various scenarios. By 3 a.m, I had the framework of a plan, painful but viable. A path that could save Reynolds Realty, though not without significant sacrifices. I finally crawled into bed beside Mark, my mind still churning with numbers and strategies. He stirred, reaching for me in the darkness. You okay? He murmured sleepily. Just thinking about tomorrow. I nestled against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Your father's company is in worse shape than I thought. Can it be saved? Yes, but not in its current form. And not with Richard making all the decisions. Mark was silent for a moment. He won't accept that easily. Being sidelined in his own company. I know. That's what I'm worried about. He pulled me closer. Whatever happens, we face it together. Remember that. I nodded against his chest, finally allowing exhaustion to pull me toward sleep. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least I had. This home, this family, this partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. Things Richard Reynolds, for all his wealth and status, had never fully understood. Morning came too quickly. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, a charcoal pantsuit with a silk blouse, and reviewed my notes one final time. Mark made coffee and toast, watching me with concerned eyes. You don't have to do this, he said as I gathered my materials. It's not your responsibility to save Reynolds Realty. I know. I accepted the travel mug he offered, but I'm doing it anyway. For Jack, for the employees, for Lily's inheritance. Not for Richard. I smiled wryly. Definitely not for Richard. The Reynolds Realty headquarters occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming downtown office tower, one that Richard himself had developed early in his career. The lobby featured marble floors, soaring ceilings, and a massive bronze sculpture that had always struck me as pretentiously abstract. The security guard nodded respectfully as I signed in, clearly recognizing me despite my infrequent visits. "Mrs. Chen Reynolds?" he acknowledged. "Mr. Jack is already upstairs." The elevator whisked me to the 20th floor, where glass doors emblazoned with the Reynolds Realty logo opened into a reception area designed to impress. Everything about the space projected success and stability, from the original artwork on the walls to the custom furniture to the carefully curated view of Mount Hood on clear days. All of it an illusion, I thought as Jack greeted me in the reception area. A facade hiding financial instability and looming crisis. "You look tired," he observed as he led me to the conference room. "Late night with your company's financials," I explained. "Not exactly bedtime reading." "That bad?" "Worse than you realize, but we'll get to that." I set my materials on the gleaming conference table. "Is your father here yet?" "He's on his way. Mom convincing him to take one of his blood pressure pills delayed their departure." Jack attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A detail I probably shouldn't have shared, but I thought you should be prepared for his mood." Noted. I began organizing my presentation. Who else will be joining us? Just Dad and me at his insistence. He doesn't want the executive team to know the full extent of the situation yet. I frowned. That's counterproductive. Any serious restructuring will require buy-in from senior leadership. "One battle at a time," Jack advised. "First, we need Dad to accept the reality of our position." The conference room door opened, and Richard strode in, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Diane hovered briefly in the doorway behind him, then disappeared without entering. "Abigail?" Richard acknowledged stiffly. "I trust you've prepared something substantive to justify this meeting." "I have." I gestured to the presentation materials. "Though I should warn you, the analysis confirms what I outlined yesterday. The situation is critical and requires immediate action." Richard settled into his chair at the head of the table, a position he clearly assumed was his by right. "Proceed." For the next 45 minutes, I walked through my findings. The true extent of Reynolds Realty's debt obligations, the overvaluation of key properties, the cash flow crisis looming in the next 60 days. I presented charts, spreadsheets, and analyses that painted an undeniable picture of a company on the brink. Richard listened with increasing discomfort, his expression darkening as I detailed particularly troubling patterns of financial management. Jack occasionally interjected to confirm specific points or provide additional context, but mostly observed his father's reactions with worried attention. "These accounting practices," I said, highlighting a section of my report, "fall into a gray area legally. If they were scrutinized by regulators—" "They have been approved by our accountants," Richard interrupted sharply. "Accountants who serve at your pleasure and know what answers you want to hear," I countered. "An independent audit would raise serious concerns." Richard's knuckles whitened around his pen. "Your point?" "My point is that these practices need to stop immediately. They're masking the true extent of the company's financial position, even from your own executive team. How can they make sound decisions without accurate information?" "I've managed this company successfully for 40 years, Richard said coldly. "I know its position better than some consultant who spent one night reviewing spreadsheets." "Then you know it's in trouble," I replied evenly. "And you know that continuing on the current path leads to only one outcome: bankruptcy." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Richard's jaw worked silently, as if physically restraining words he wished to speak. "What would you propose instead?" he finally asked, his tone carefully controlled. I flipped to the next section of my presentation. A comprehensive restructuring in 3 phases. First, immediate stabilization of cash flow through asset sales and debt renegotiation. Second, operational streamlining to reduce costs. Third, strategic repositioning with a focus on sustainable, profitable core business. Asset sales, Richard repeated. You mean liquidation? I mean strategic divestiture of underperforming properties, I corrected, starting with these. I pushed forward a list of 7 properties, all prestigious addresses, all operating at losses masked by creative accounting. Richard barely glanced at the list. These are signature Reynolds holdings, the Riverside Plaza, the Madison Heights development. These aren't just properties. They're the cornerstones of our portfolio. They're anchors dragging you down, I stated bluntly. The Riverside Plaza hasn't generated positive cash flow in 3 years. Madison Heights is 30% vacant with maintenance costs exceeding revenue. You're maintaining these properties for prestige, not profit. There are considerations beyond simple profitability, Richard insisted. Brand recognition, market, presence, long-term appreciation potential. None of which matters if you don't survive the next 6 months, I pointed out. And based on your current debt obligations and cash position, that's the time frame we're working with. Jack leaned forward. She's right, Dad. I've been trying to tell you this for months. We're running out of runway. Richard's gaze shifted. Between his son and me, his expression a complex mixture of anger, disbelief, and, most surprisingly, fear. For perhaps the first time, I glimpsed the vulnerability beneath his imperious facade. He was afraid, not just for his company, but for his legacy, his identity, his very sense of self. Even if I were to consider these divestitures, he said slowly, the current market isn't favorable. We'd be selling at a loss. Yes, I agreed simply, but a controlled loss now is better than a total loss in bankruptcy. And the second phase? Operational streamlining, you called it. That means layoffs. Staff reductions would be necessary, I acknowledged, particularly at the executive level, where compensation is highest relative to direct value creation. Richard's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting I fire my leadership team, people who have been with me for decades. I'm suggesting a leaner organization appropriate to the company's current size and financial capacity. That includes reducing executive compensation across the board, including yours. That last point landed exactly as I'd expected, like a slap across Richard's face. His pride visibly smarted from the suggestion that he, the founder and CEO, should take a pay cut. Out of the question, he snapped. The company needs strong leadership now more than ever. The company needs financial solvency more than it needs expensive corner offices and executive perks, I countered. Every dollar saved in overhead is a dollar that helps ensure survival. Jack interjected before his father could retort. Abby's right, Dad. We've become top-heavy. Too many VPs with overlapping responsibilities and insufficient accountability. It's not just about saving money, it's about creating a more effective organization. Richard rubbed his temples, a rare display of physical discomfort. And your third phase? Strategic repositioning, was it? What exactly does that entail? I flipped to the final section of my presentation, refocusing on what Reynolds Realty does best: mid-market commercial properties with stable, long-term tenants. Stepping back from luxury residential developments, which have higher volatility and thinner margins in the current market. That's a dramatic departure from our current business model, Richard observed. Your current business model is failing, I said bluntly. The market has shifted and Reynolds Realty hasn't adapted. The companies that survive are those willing to evolve. Richard's expression hardened again. Like your restaurant, I suppose, a model of flexible business principles. Actually, yes, I replied calmly. When we started, Harvest Table was primarily a dinner destination. When I noticed lunch traffic increasing in the neighborhood due to new office developments, we extended our hours. When food costs for certain ingredients spiked, we adjusted our menu. Business is about adaptation, Richard, not rigid adherence to the way we've always done things. A tense silence fell over the conference room. Richard stared at the presentation materials spread before him, his internal struggle evident in the tight set of his jaw and the slight tremor in his normally steady hands. "I need time to consider all this," he finally said. "These recommendations are more extensive than I anticipated." "Time is a luxury you don't have," I reminded him. "Based on your cash position and upcoming debt obligations, decisions need to be made within days, not weeks." "Days," Richard repeated incredulously. "You expect me to dismantle what I've spent 40 years building in a matter of days?" "I expect you to save what can be saved," I corrected, "which requires immediate action." Jack cleared his throat. "Abby's right about the timeline, Dad. The Westchester loan comes due on the 15th. That's less than 2 weeks away, and we don't have the cash to cover it." Richard's face paled slightly. "We can negotiate an extension." "We've already had 2 extensions," Jack reminded him. "The bank has made it clear there won't be a third without significant changes to our overall financial structure." "Which is exactly what I'm proposing," I added. "This plan gives you something concrete to present to your lenders, a viable path forward that addresses their concerns about repayment." Richard stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Portland. For a long moment, he simply stared out at the city he'd helped shape through decades of development projects. When he turned back, his expression was guarded, but no longer hostile. "If, and I stress if, we were to implement some version of this plan, who would oversee the execution? You?" I shook my head. "As I said yesterday, that would be Jack's role as CFO. I would provide ongoing advisory support during the transition, but the implementation must come from within." "With your oversight," Richard noted sourly. "With my guidance," I corrected. "In partnership with Jack, who understands both the business and the family considerations involved." Richard's gaze shifted to his son. "And you believe this is the only viable path forward? Selling our landmark properties? Laying off loyal employees? Retreating from the luxury market we pioneered in this city?" Jack met his father's gaze steadily. "I do. I've been trying to tell you this for months, Dad. The numbers don't lie. We're running out of options." Another long silence filled the room as Richard processed this. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, weighing his pride against survival, his ego against reality. "I want a second opinion," he finally said. "From Braddock at First Western." Tom Braddock was Reynolds Realty's longtime banker, a contemporary of Richard's who had facilitated many of the company's largest deals over the years. I suppressed a sigh, recognizing the delaying tactic for what it was. "That's your prerogative," I acknowledged, "but Braddock has a vested interest in maintaining your business relationship. He's unlikely to give you the unvarnished truth if it threatens that relationship. Nevertheless, I want his assessment of this plan." Richard gestured dismissively at my presentation. "If he confirms your analysis, I'll consider your recommendations more seriously." It wasn't the unequivocal acceptance I'd hoped for, but it was progress. Richard Reynolds admitting even the possibility that I might be right represented a major shift from his usual dismissive attitude toward my professional opinions. "Fair enough," I conceded. "But this doesn't change the timeline. The Westchester loan is still due on the 15th, regardless of whose analysis you prefer." Richard nodded curtly. "I'm aware of our obligations. I'll speak to Braddock today." Jack stood, sensing the meeting's conclusion. "I'll arrange a call with him this afternoon. In the meantime, Dad, I think we should at least begin preliminary discussions with brokers about the Riverside Plaza. Testing the market doesn't commit us to selling Richard's mouth tightened, but he nodded. Make the calls. Discreetly. As I gathered my materials, Richard approached me directly for the first time since entering the room. His expression was still guarded, but a hint of reluctant respect had replaced his earlier hostility. Your analysis is thorough, he acknowledged stiffly. Whatever our personal differences, I can at least recognize professional competence. Coming from Richard Reynolds, this constituted high praise. I accepted it with a nod. I want the company to survive, Richard. Not for your sake, perhaps, but for Jack's, for Lily's, for the employees who depend on Reynolds Realty for their livelihoods. Not for Mark? He asked, a hint of his old bitterness creeping into his tone. Mark made his peace with walking away from Reynolds Realty years ago. He doesn't define himself by his connection to the company or the family fortune. Richard's expression tightened again. A luxury afforded by your financial success, I suppose. No, I corrected evenly. A choice made based on his values and priorities. The same choice he'd have made regardless of our financial situation. Richard studied me, as if seeing me clearly for perhaps the first time. You truly believe that, don't you? That he would have chosen teaching over real estate even without your backup plan. It wasn't a backup plan, Richard. It was a partnership. Two people supporting each other's dreams and making sacrifices for the greater good of their family. I met his gaze directly. Something you might understand if you viewed marriage as a collaboration instead of a transaction. For once, Richard seemed genuinely taken aback, whether by my insight or my audacity, I couldn't tell. Before he could respond, Jack intervened. I'll walk you out, Abby, he said, a hint of warning in his tone. I'd apparently pushed the tentative truce to its limits. As we walked toward the elevator, Jack let out a breath. That went better than I expected. Did it? I was less convinced. He's still looking for ways to avoid the hard decisions. But he's considering them, Jack pointed out. That's progress. And Braddock will back us up. He knows the real state of our finances better than anyone outside the company. I hope you're right. The elevator arrived and I stepped in. Keep me posted on his conversation with Braddock. And Jack, start documenting everything. Every recommendation, every decision, every delay, just in case. His expression grew serious. You think it might come to that? Legal issues? I think your father is a proud man backed into a corner. That makes him unpredictable. The elevator doors began to close. Be careful. As I drove back to Harvest Table for my afternoon shift, my mind continued to process the meeting's implications. Richard had been more receptive than I'd anticipated, even while maintaining his defensive posture. Jack seemed cautiously optimistic about implementing at least some of my recommendations. But something nagged at me, a sense that we were missing a piece of the puzzle. Richard's resistance went beyond normal pride or stubbornness. His attachment to those signature properties seemed almost personal, transcending business logic. And his insistence on consulting Braddock specifically, rather than an independent financial advisor, struck me as calculated rather than merely habitual. By the time I reached the restaurant, a suspicion had formed in my mind, one I needed to explore further before our next conversation with Richard. I parked in my reserved spot and pulled out my phone, sending a text to an old colleague from Meridian Wealth Management who now worked at First Western Bank. Need to pick your brain about commercial real estate financing. Confidential. Lunch next week? Her response came quickly. For you, anytime. Tuesday work? I confirmed the date, then headed into the restaurant, my chef's coat replacing my business suit as I transitioned from financial advisor to restaurateur. But even as I reviewed the day's specials and greeted my staff, part of my mind remained fixed on Reynolds Realty and the mysteries that still lurked within its financial statements. The next piece of the puzzle arrived unexpectedly that evening. Mark and I were cleaning up after dinner when Lily burst into the kitchen, laptop in hand, her expression animated. "Mom, I found something weird when I was looking through my school project research on Reynolds Realty." I set down the dish I was drying. "What kind of weird?" "Remember how I told Grandpa I used his company as a case study for my sustainable business practices project? I was going through my research notes to send him the presentation, and I noticed something about the Riverside Plaza property." Mark joined us at the kitchen island, his interest piqued. "The property your mom recommended selling first?" "Yeah. So get this. I was researching potential green retrofitting for the building, and I found these environmental impact statements from when it was first built. There's something strange about the ownership structure." She turned her laptop to face us, showing a complicated legal document. I scanned it quickly, my suspicions from earlier crystallizing into something more concrete. "Lily, where did you find this?" "Public records database. We have access through school for research projects." She pointed to a section of the document. "See here? Riverside Plaza isn't wholly owned by Reynolds Realty. There's a limited partnership called Riverview Holdings that owns 40%. I felt a chill of realization. "And who controls Riverview Holdings?" Lily scrolled down. "That's the weird part. It's registered in the Cayman Islands. Super hard to trace. But I kept digging, and I found a news article from when the building was completed that mentioned the partnership. Apparently, Riverview Holdings is controlled by, drumroll please, Thomas Braddock." Mark looked between us, confusion evident. "Braddock? As in—" "Dad's banker," I confirmed, my earlier suspicions now validated. "The same banker he insists on consulting about my restructuring plan. The same banker who would stand to lose significantly if Reynolds Realty sold the Riverside Plaza." "So Grandpa and his banker have a side deal on this property?" Lily asked. "Is that, legal?" "It's legal if it's disclosed properly to shareholders and the board," I explained. "But based on the financial statements I reviewed, this arrangement isn't clearly documented in the company records. Which means Dad is hiding it," Mark finished, his expression darkening. "Protecting his and Braddock's interests at the expense of the company's financial health. It would explain his strong resistance to selling that particular property," I mused, "and his insistence on getting Braddock's opinion on the restructuring plan." Lily looked troubled. "So Grandpa's being shady? Actually corrupt?" I chose my words carefully. "Business relationships can be complicated, Lily. This arrangement may have made sense when it was established, but continuing to prioritize it when the company is in financial distress raises ethical questions at minimum." "What are you going to do?" Mark asked. I considered our options. Confronting Richard directly would likely trigger defensiveness and denial. Going to the board would be perceived as an act of aggression, but doing nothing would compromise the restructuring efforts before they even began. First, I need to confirm the details of this arrangement. "Lily, can you forward me everything you found?" She nodded, already typing. "Then I need to speak with Jack. He may know about this partnership, or he may be in the dark like we were." "And if Jack doesn't know?" Mark pressed. "Then we have a bigger problem than I thought." I rubbed my temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. Because it means Richard has been hiding significant financial arrangements not just from the board, but from his own CFO. And that raises serious questions about what other surprises might be lurking in the Reynolds Realty books. I called Jack first thing Sunday morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Abby, what's wrong? We need to talk in person today." I kept my tone even, controlled, despite the urgency I felt. "It's about Riverside Plaza and Riverview Holdings." A pause. "I'll be at your place in an hour." The line went dead. His immediate response told me everything I needed to know. Jack was aware of the arrangement. The only question was how much he knew about its implications for the restructuring plan. Mark looked up from the pancakes he was making as I set down my phone. "He's coming here?" I nodded. His reaction suggests he knows about the partnership, but maybe not the full picture. Or he does and has been part of the deception all along, Mark suggested, his expression hardening. "Let's not jump to conclusions," I cautioned. "Jack has been pushing for financial transparency. It doesn't make sense that he'd be complicit in hiding something like this." Mark flipped a pancake with more force than necessary. "My family has a talent for compartmentalizing. Dad could have convinced Jack that this arrangement was separate from the company's main financial issues. We'll know soon enough." I reached for coffee mugs. "Do you want to be part of this conversation?" He considered the question. "No. Jack will be more forthcoming with just you. I'll take Lily to her debate team practice and give you space." Jack arrived exactly 59 minutes later, looking harried and uncharacteristically disheveled in jeans and an untucked button-down. I led him to our back patio, where the relative privacy would allow for an honest conversation. The November morning was crisp but not uncomfortably cold, the garden's fading colors providing a peaceful backdrop for what promised to be a difficult discussion. "So you found out about Riverview Holdings," Jack said without preamble as we sat at the patio table. It wasn't a question. "Lily did, actually, while researching for a school project." Jack's eyebrows rose. "Your 16-year-old daughter uncovered what our company lawyers have spent years obscuring? Impressive. She's thorough, and public records are more accessible than they used to be." I studied his face. "How long have you known?" Jack sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "About 3 years. I found discrepancies in the property reports and confronted Dad. He presented it as a strategic partnership, a way to secure favorable financing through First Western by giving Braddock skin in the game." "And you accepted that explanation?" "Not entirely. But by the time I discovered it, the arrangement had been in place for nearly a decade. Dad insisted it was properly disclosed to the board at the time." "Was it?" Jack's hesitation answered before his words did. "The board? Minutes from that period are ambiguous. The partnership was mentioned, but the connection to Braddock wasn't explicit." I took a sip of coffee, organizing my thoughts. "Jack, this puts the entire restructuring plan at risk. If we can't sell Riverside Plaza because of Richard's side deal with Braddock." "We can still sell it," Jack interrupted. "Dad doesn't have unilateral authority to block a sale. The board would have to approve any major asset disposition, but they would also have to approve any restructuring plan. A board that historically has rubber-stamped Richard's decisions," I pointed out. "Things have changed. 2 of the oldest board members retired last year, replaced by more independent directors. And the financial situation is dire enough that even Dad's most loyal supporters are asking uncomfortable questions." I considered this information. "So what happened when you confronted Richard about Riverview Holdings?" Jack's expression darkened. He justified it as necessary for the company's growth at the time. Said Braddock took a risk when other banks wouldn't, and the partnership was his reward. He made it clear the arrangement wasn't up for discussion or renegotiation. "And now?" "Now it's a potential legal liability as well as a financial anchor." Jack met my gaze directly. "Which is why I didn't mention it to you initially. I was hoping your analysis would provide the external pressure needed to force Dad to address it." I felt a flare of irritation. "You should have told me. I can't develop an effective restructuring plan without all the relevant information." "You're right," Jack acknowledged. "I should have. But I was worried you'd walk away if you knew how complicated this really is." "I almost did anyway," I reminded him. "What other landmines am I walking into blindly, Jack?" He hesitated again. "There might be similar arrangements with 2 other properties. Nothing I can confirm yet, but there are patterns in the financial statements that suggest comparable structures." My irritation deepened. Any other critical information you've withheld? Just one thing, Jack admitted reluctantly. Dad met with Braddock yesterday after our meeting. I wasn't included, but my assistant overheard them discussing alternative financing options. I think Dad's looking for a way around your restructuring plan. This didn't surprise me, but it did concern me. Alternative financing at this point would almost certainly involve predatory terms. It would be throwing good money after bad. I know. Jack's voice carried the weight of his frustration. But Dad would rather take on more debt than admit the strategy that built Reynolds Realty no longer works. So where does that leave us? Jack leaned forward. We need to get ahead of this. Present the Riverview Holdings information to the board ourselves as part of a comprehensive disclosure of the company's financial position. Dad won't like it, but it's the only way to ensure the restructuring plan gets fair consideration. That's a significant escalation, I observed. Going around Richard directly to the board. It is. Jack's determination was evident in the set of his jaw. But I've tried working through Dad for months. He nods, agrees things need to change, then continues the same patterns that got us here. We're running out of time and options. I considered our position carefully. Escalating to the board would irreparably damage Jack's relationship with his father. It could also backfire if the board remained loyal to Richard despite the company's precarious financial state. But continuing our current approach, trying to convince Richard to implement changes he fundamentally resisted, seemed equally futile. When does the board meet next? I asked. Wednesday. But I can call an emergency session with 24 hours notice if necessary. Let's try one more direct approach with Richard, I suggested. Present him with what we know about Riverview Holdings and give him the opportunity to address it properly. If he refuses, then we go to the board. Jack nodded slowly. That's fair. More than fair, given the circumstances. Can you arrange a meeting with him today? Time is critical. Jack checked his phone. He's golfing with clients until 3. I can get us on his calendar for 5. That gives us a few hours to prepare our approach. As Jack made the call to his father's assistant, I reflected on the escalating stakes. What had begun as a professional courtesy, reviewing financial statements for my brother-in-law's company, had evolved into something far more consequential. We were contemplating actions that would fundamentally reshape Reynolds Realty and potentially fracture family relationships beyond repair. Mark returned with Lily just as Jack was leaving. The questioning look in my husband's eyes prompted a full debriefing once we were alone. So Jack knew about the partnership but kept it from you? Mark's tone conveyed his lack of surprise. Classic Reynolds compartmentalization. He had his reasons, I said, playing devil's advocate despite my own lingering irritation with Jack's omission. He's in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to his father and his fiduciary responsibility to the company. And now you're meeting with Richard again? Today? Mark's concern was evident. Are you sure that's wise? It's necessary. If there's any chance of resolving this without escalating to the board, we need to try. For Jack's sake, if nothing else. Mark's expression softened. You really care about saving this company, don't you, despite everything Richard and Diane have put you through? I care about the people who would be affected if it fails, I clarified. Jack, the employees, even Lily, who seems genuinely interested in her Reynolds heritage, however complicated. And what about Richard? I considered the question honestly. I don't wish him ill, but I won't protect his pride at the expense of the company's survival. If he can't separate the two, that's his problem, not mine. Mark pulled me into an embrace. Just be careful. Dad's at his most dangerous when he's cornered. At 5 o'clock precisely, Jack and I arrived at Richard's home office, a wood-paneled sanctuary within the Lake Oswego mansion, filled with mementos of his business achievements. Awards, deal tombstones, Photos with prominent politicians and business leaders lined the walls and shelves, creating a shrine to Richard's conception of success. Richard sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a physical barrier that established his authority in the space. His expression was guarded, bordering on hostile. "This better be important," he said by way of greeting. "Braddock and I are still reviewing your recommendations. I wasn't planning to discuss next steps until tomorrow." "This can't wait," Jack replied, his professional demeanor firmly in place despite the personal nature of the conversation. "We need to discuss Riverside Plaza and Riverview Holdings." Richard went very still, only a slight narrowing of his eyes betraying his surprise. "That arrangement is irrelevant to the current restructuring discussions." "It's entirely relevant," I countered, keeping my tone measured. "Riverside Plaza is one of the properties I've identified as necessary to sell in the first phase of restructuring. We can't proceed without addressing the Riverview Holdings partnership." "Riverside Plaza is not for sale," Richard stated flatly. "Find another solution." "There isn't another solution that achieves the necessary debt reduction in the required time frame," I explained. "Riverside Plaza represents the single largest opportunity to improve the company's cash position quickly, and coincidentally threatens your partnership with Braddock," Jack added. "A partnership that hasn't been properly disclosed to the current board or shareholders." Richard's expression darkened. "That arrangement was established years ago, with proper approvals at the time." "Ambiguous approvals at best," Jack corrected. "The board minutes don't explicitly mention Braddock's involvement, and the current board members aren't aware of the connection." "This is a family discussion," Richard snapped, "not a board meeting." "It needs to be both," I interjected. "Richard, the partnership with Braddock creates a clear conflict of interest that affects your ability to make objective decisions about the company's restructuring. It needs to be disclosed to the board before any restructuring plan can be implemented." Richard's gaze shifted between us, calculation evident in his expression. "And if I refuse, then Jack will be forced to disclose it himself, as part of his fiduciary duty as CFO," I answered. "Which would raise questions about why it wasn't revealed sooner." "You're threatening me," Richard observed coldly. "In my own home." "We're trying to save the company," Jack corrected. "But we can't do that without complete transparency." Richard stood, pacing behind his desk. Braddock took a risk on Riverside Plaza when no one else would. The partnership was his compensation for that risk. It's a private business arrangement that has no bearing on the company's current situation. "It has every bearing," I insisted. "It's preventing you from making the necessary decision to sell a non-performing asset. And it raises serious questions about your priorities, protecting a private arrangement versus fulfilling your responsibilities to shareholders and employees." Richard stopped pacing, facing us directly. "You know nothing about my responsibilities. I built this company from the ground up. Every building, every deal, every relationship, they exist because of my vision, my work, my reputation. And now that same company is in jeopardy because you won't acknowledge reality," Jack said, his frustration evident. "Dad, I've tried to work with you on this for months. I've brought you the numbers, the projections, the warning signs. You nodded and agreed changes were needed, then continued the same patterns that created these problems." "Business involves risk," Richard replied dismissively. "Temporary setbacks. You've never understood that, Jackson. You've always been too cautious, too concerned with worst-case scenarios." "Those worst-case scenarios are now our reality," Jack shot back. "We have 60 days of operational cash left. The Westchester loan comes due in less than 2 weeks. 3 major tenants have given notice they're not renewing their leases. These aren't projections anymore. They're facts." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard returned to his chair, his movements betraying a weariness that his words continued to deny. "Braddock is prepared to extend additional financing," he finally said. Enough to cover the Westchester loan and provide operating capital for the next quarter. At what terms? I asked sharply. Richard's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Exactly, I said. Predatory terms that will only deepen the company's financial hole. It's not a solution. It's a delayed death sentence. It buys us time, Richard insisted. Time to let the market recover, to lease up vacant spaces, to renegotiate existing. Loans from a position of strength rather than desperation. The market isn't the problem, Jack said quietly. Our business model is. The strategy that built Reynolds Realty no longer works in today's environment. We need to adapt, not double down on approaches that are already failing. Richard's jaw tightened. So your solution is to dismantle what I've built? Sell off our flagship properties? Lay off loyal employees? Retreat from the luxury market I pioneered in this city? Our solution is to save what can be saved, I clarified. To create a leaner, more focused company that can thrive in current conditions rather than clinging to past glories. And my partnership with Braddock? What's your solution for that? Richard's tone was challenging. Full disclosure to the board, Jack replied without hesitation, followed by a structured buyout of the Riverview Holdings interest if the board approves the sale of Riverside Plaza. With what money? Richard scoffed. If we're as cash-strapped as you claim, where would funds for a buyout come from? From the sale proceeds, I explained. The partnership would receive its contractual share, but the transaction would still generate significant net capital for debt reduction. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying us with narrowed eyes. And if I refuse? If I tell you both? To leave my house and my company affairs alone? Jack straightened his shoulders. Then I call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. I present the full financial picture, including the undisclosed partnerships, and I recommend the board consider management changes alongside financial restructuring. The threat hung in the air, clear, explicit, undeniable. Jack was prepared to depose his own father if necessary to save the company. Richard's expression shifted from anger to something more complex. A mixture of disbelief, hurt, and perhaps a flicker of respect. You would do that? Remove your own father from the company he founded? I would do whatever necessary to save Reynolds Realty, Jack confirmed, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the confrontation. The company isn't just yours anymore, Dad. It's the livelihood of 200 employees. It's a part of this city's landscape. It's Mark's inheritance and Lily's future trust. I can't let your pride destroy all of that. Richard turned to me. And you? What's your stake in this palace coup? Revenge for years of perceived slights? The satisfaction of seeing Richard Reynolds humbled? I'm here because Jack asked for my professional expertise, I replied evenly. Nothing more, nothing less. Whatever personal history exists between us, I've set it aside to focus on the company's needs. How very noble, Richard's tone dripped with skepticism. The gold digger transforming into the selfless financial savior. I refused to take the bait. Call it what you want. The numbers don't change based on your opinion of me. Richard fell silent, absently turning a pen between his fingers as he considered his options. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked, loudly, marking the passage of tense seconds. I need to speak with Braddock, he finally said, and with Diane. Family decisions of this magnitude require her input. This isn't just a family decision, Jack reminded him. It's a business decision with legal and fiduciary implications. Nevertheless, Richard's tone was firm. I won't be rushed into anything this significant without proper consultation. Jack and I exchanged glances. You have until 9 tomorrow morning, Jack stated. After that, I call the emergency board meeting. Richard's expression hardened. Again. You're giving me an ultimatum? In my own house? I'm giving you the courtesy of addressing this privately before it becomes a corporate governance issue, Jack replied. Something I'm doing out of respect for our family relationship, despite your repeated dismissal of my professional concerns. Richard studied his son for a long moment, perhaps seeing him clearly for the first time, not as the deferential, younger son, but as a capable executive making difficult decisions. 9 tomorrow morning, Richard finally agreed. I'll have my answer then. As Jack drove me home, the tension of the confrontation lingered between us. Do you think he'll agree? I asked, breaking the silence. Jack's hands tightened on the knee steering wheel. I don't know. Logic says he should. The evidence is overwhelming, and the alternatives are worse. But Dad has never been driven purely by logic, especially when his legacy is at stake. And if he refuses, are you prepared to follow through on the board meeting? Jack nodded grimly. I have to be. The company can't survive another 6 months on its current trajectory. What about your relationship with him? Can that survive? Jack was silent for several blocks, considering the question. Dad has always equated loyalty with obedience, he finally said. Anything less is betrayal in his eyes. So no, our relationship probably won't survive if I have to go to the board. But I've made my peace with that possibility. I'm sorry, Jack. This wasn't what I signed up for when I agreed to review the company financials. He managed a small smile. Actually, it's exactly what I was hoping for. Someone with both the expertise and the courage to confront the situation head-on. I just didn't anticipate how quickly things would escalate. Or how complicated they'd become with the Riverview Holdings revelation. That too. He sighed heavily. The irony is that Dad could have addressed this years ago, when the market was stronger. A planned, orderly restructuring then would have been far less painful than the emergency measures we're proposing now. Pride is expensive, I observed. So is denial. Jack pulled into my driveway, putting the car in park but leaving the engine running. Thank you, Abby. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I appreciate everything you've done. Not just the financial analysis, but your willingness to put yourself in the line of fire despite years of mistreatment from my parents. I squeezed his arm gently. Family is complicated, but it's still family. Inside, Mark was waiting in the living room, pretending to read but obviously anxious for news. Lily had already gone to bed, exhausted from her debate tournament. How did it go? He asked as I sank onto the sofa beside him. About as well as could be expected. Richard needs to consult with Braddock and Diane before giving his answer. Tomorrow morning. And if the answer is no? Then Jack calls an emergency board meeting to disclose everything. The financial crisis, the undisclosed partnerships, the need for restructuring. Mark set aside his book, effectively ending his relationship with Dad. Probably, I acknowledged. And possibly with Diane too, if she sides with Richard, which seems likely. Are you okay with your role in all this? Being the catalyst for what could be a permanent family fracture? I considered the question carefully. I didn't create the financial problems or the hidden partnerships. I just brought them into the open. If the family fractures over that, the cracks were already there. Mark nodded slowly. True. But triggers still bear some responsibility for what they set in motion. Would you rather I had refused to help? Let Reynolds Realty continue its decline until bankruptcy became inevitable? No, he conceded. I just wish the situation wasn't so absolute, so zero-sum. That's your father's doing, not mine, I reminded him gently. He's the one who created these all-or-nothing conditions by refusing to acknowledge reality until a crisis forced his hand. Mark sighed, pulling me closer. I know, and I'm not blaming you. I just can't help wondering if there was another path, some way to address the problems without such devastating personal consequences. There was. Months ago, when Jack first raised concerns. Years ago, when the market started shifting. Your father chose not to take those paths. We sat in contemplative silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts about what tomorrow might bring. Whatever Richard decided, the comfortable distance we'd maintained from Reynolds' realty affairs had been irreparably breached. We were now entangled in the company's fate, whether we wanted to be or not. "I should call Jack," Mark finally said. "Check on him. This has to be even harder on him than on us." "Good idea. And I need to update my analysis based on what we've learned about Riverside Plaza. If Richard agrees to the restructuring, we'll need a detailed implementation plan immediately." As Mark made his call and I returned to my spreadsheets, I couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Richard Reynolds had spent a lifetime building his company and his image. He wouldn't relinquish control easily, even with irrefutable evidence that change was necessary. There was another shoe yet to drop. I could feel it. My phone rang shortly after midnight. Jack's name on the screen sent a surge of anxiety through me. "Jack? What's wrong?" His voice was tight with stress. "Dad's gone. So is Mom. The housekeeper just called me. They packed bags and left around 10. No word on where they're going." "Have you tried calling them?" Both phones go straight to voicemail. Dad's admin hasn't heard from him, and his passport is missing from his office safe. I processed this information quickly. "What about company accounts? Banking access?" "I'm heading to the office now to check. The CFO position gives me signatory authority on most accounts, but Dad maintained sole control over some of the reserve funds." "This is bad, Jack." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "I never thought he'd run. Fight, yes. Threaten, absolutely. But disappear? That's not his style. Unless he's buying time for something else," I suggested, the foreboding feeling intensifying. "Check the accounts immediately and contact the board members tonight. Don't wait until morning." "You think he's going to try to move assets?" "I think a cornered Richard Reynolds is capable of almost anything to protect his pride and his money, especially if Diane is encouraging him." Jack was silent for a moment, absorbing this perspective. "I'll call you back when I know more." I woke Mark, explaining the situation in terse sentences as I dressed hurriedly. "Where are you going?" he asked, sitting up in bed. "To meet Jack at the office. Someone needs to review the accounts while he contacts board members, and I know what to look for." Mark swung his legs over the side of the bed. "I'm coming with you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted firmly. "If Dad's done something drastic, Jack will need more than financial expertise. He'll need family support." We left a note for Lily, promising to explain everything when we returned, and drove through the empty midnight streets to the Reynolds Realty offices downtown. Jack met us in the lobby, his face haggard with stress. "Anything?" I asked as we rode the elevator to the executive floor. Jack shook his head. "No response from either of them. I've reached 3 board members so far. They're as shocked as we are. The emergency meeting is set for 8 a.m. In the executive suite, Jack led us to Richard's private office, a larger, more imposing version of his home study. The wall safe stood open and empty behind the desk. "He took everything," Jack confirmed. "Passport, emergency cash, personal documents." "What about the company accounts?" I asked, already moving toward the computer. "My credentials don't access his private files, but I can get you into the main financial systems." For the next hour, I combed through account records while Jack continued calling board members, and Mark searched Richard's office for any clues to his plans. The picture that emerged was troubling, but not yet catastrophic. "He's moved money," I confirmed, pointing to suspicious transactions from the previous evening. "About $3 million from the reserve account to a private holding company I don't recognize." "Westlake Partners," Jack supplied, looking over my shoulder. "It's one of his personal investment vehicles. technically separate from Reynolds Realty, though he's used it for company transactions in the past. Is the transfer legal? Mark asked from across the room, where he was examining Richard's appointment calendar. Questionable, Jack replied. The reserve account is supposed to be for company emergencies only, not personal use. But the account documents give him signatory authority and broad discretion. What about the Westchester loan? I asked. Has that been affected? Jack checked another screen. The payment account is untouched. That money is still there at least. Small mercies, I murmured. But the reserve funds would have been crucial for operations during restructuring. Without them, the cash flow situation becomes even more precarious. Mark joined us at the computer. So what's his play here? Take the money and run? Not his style, Jack and I said simultaneously. Dad doesn't run from fights, Jack elaborated. He's repositioning, moving resources where he thinks we can't reach them before making his countermove. Which would be what? Mark pressed. If I had to guess, I said slowly, he's planning to use those funds to secure the additional financing from Braddock that he mentioned. Create a fait accompli that forces the board to accept his approach rather than ours. Jack nodded grimly. That sounds like Dad. He'd rather burn cash on unfavorable loan terms than admit his strategy has failed. So what do we do? Mark asked. Jack straightened his shoulders, decision evident in his posture. We proceed with the emergency board meeting. We disclose everything, the financial situation, the Riverview Holdings partnership, and now Dad's unauthorized transfer of reserve funds. We request temporary leadership authority while the board determines next steps. And Richard and Diane? I asked. They've made their choice, Jack replied, a note of finality in his voice. Now, we make ours. As dawn broke over Portland, illuminating the Reynolds Realty offices with pale winter light, we continued our preparations for the board meeting. Jack gathered documentation, I refined the restructuring presentation, and Mark made coffee runs while providing moral support to his brother. At 7:30, Jack's phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. He answered on speakerphone, his expression wary. Jackson Reynolds. Jack, it's Dad. The three of us exchanged glances, the tension in the room ratcheting higher. Where are you? Jack asked, his voice carefully neutral. That's not important, Richard replied dismissively. What matters is that I've secured the additional financing we discussed. $15 million, enough to cover the Westchester loan and provide operating capital through next quarter. At what terms? I interjected. A pause. Abigail, I should have known you'd be involved in this early morning conspiracy. The terms, Richard? I pressed. Reasonable, given the circumstances. 12%, secured by the Westbrook properties. 12% is predatory, Jack objected, and the Westbrook properties are already underwater after the tax liens. Details that can be managed, Richard insisted. The point is, I've solved our immediate cash flow problem. The emergency board meeting you've called is unnecessary. Jack's expression hardened. The meeting proceeds as scheduled. The board needs to know about the Riverview Holdings partnership and the unauthorized transfer of reserve funds. Unauthorized? Richard's tone sharpened. I am the CEO and founder of this company. Those funds are at my discretion. Not according to the corporate bylaws, Jack countered. Reserve funds require board notification for transfers exceeding $1 million. Another pause, longer this time. You've certainly done your homework, Jackson, though I'm disappointed you've chosen to use that knowledge against your own father. I'm using it to save the company, Jack replied steadily. Something that has become necessary because of your choices, not mine. And what does Mark think of this filial rebellion? Richard asked suddenly. Is he there too, completing the family united front? I'm here, Dad, Mark confirmed. Supporting Jack and doing what's necessary, even though it's difficult. Richard's laugh held no humor. My sons, the usurpers. One who abandoned the company for chalk dust and textbooks, the other who stayed only to plan his takeover. That's not fair, Jack objected. I've tried to work with you for months. I've brought you the numbers, the projections, the warning signs. You dismissed all of it. Because I have 40 years of experience navigating market cycles, Richard shot back. This downturn is temporary like all the others. It requires steady nerves, not panic selling and restructuring. The market isn't the problem, I interjected. Your business model is. The strategy that built Reynolds Realty doesn't work in today's environment. Adapting isn't failure, it's survival. I didn't call for your business philosophy, Abigail. Richard's tone was cutting. I called to inform Jack that I've resolved the immediate financial crisis. The board meeting should be canceled. That's not going to happen, Jack stated firmly. The board needs all the facts before deciding next steps, including your new financing arrangement and the unauthorized fund transfer. A heavy silence filled the line. When Richard spoke again, his voice carried a dangerous quiet. You're determined to do this? To publicly challenge my leadership of the company I built? I'm determined to save Reynolds Realty, Jack replied. Even if that means difficult truths must be confronted. Very well. The resignation in Richard's tone was belied by a subtle note of threat. But remember, Jackson, you chose this path. Whatever happens next is on your shoulders, not mine. The line went dead before Jack could respond. The three of us exchanged concerned glances. That was ominous, Mark observed. What do you think he's planning? Nothing good, I replied, the foreboding feeling stronger than ever. Jack, we need to secure the company systems immediately. Change access codes, freeze additional accounts, notify the banks of potential irregular activity. You think he'd sabotage his own company? Jack asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. I think Richard would rather see Reynolds Realty burn than admit he's no longer capable of running it effectively, I said grimly, especially if he can blame the destruction on us. As Jack moved to implement the security measures, Mark pulled me aside. This has gone beyond a family disagreement or a business restructuring, he said quietly. We're in dangerous territory now. I nodded, the weight of our situation settling heavily on my shoulders. Richard has spent his entire life building Reynolds Realty. It's not just his company, it's his identity, his legacy, his proof of worth. Taking that away, even to save it, was always going to provoke an extreme response. And now? Now we prepare for a fight, I replied, gathering my notes for the board presentation. A fight for the future of Reynolds Realty. A fight Richard and Diane have already shown they're willing to abandon their family to win. The conference. Room began filling with board members shortly before 8, serious-faced men and women in business attire, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the emergency session. Jack greeted each one professionally, though the strain of the situation showed in the tightness around his eyes. As the meeting time approached, I took my place beside Jack at the front of the room, my restructuring presentation ready. Mark sat near the back, a silent supporter. The board chairman called the meeting to order precisely at 8, acknowledging the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. Before we begin, the chairman said, I must inform you that I received an email from Richard Reynolds at 7:45 this morning. He states that he has secured additional financing to address the company's immediate cash needs and objects to this emergency session as unnecessary and potentially damaging to investor confidence. Murmurs spread through the room. Jack stepped forward. Mr. Chairman, I believe the full financial picture needs to be presented before any judgment can be made about the necessity of this meeting. With your permission, I'd like to proceed with our presentation. The chairman nodded. Please do. The board needs complete information to make informed decisions. Jack began methodically laying out the company's true financial position, supported by my analysis and documentation. He detailed the over-leveraged properties, the cash flow crisis, the declining asset values, and finally, the Riverview Holdings partnership with Braddock. This undisclosed arrangement represents a significant conflict of interest, Jack explained. It has prevented objective decision-making about a key property that needs to be sold to improve the company's financial position. One board member, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Are you saying Richard concealed his partnership with Braddock from the board?" "The current board, yes," Jack confirmed. The arrangement was established years ago, with ambiguous documentation that didn't clearly identify Braddock's involvement. "And the reserve fund transfer?" another member asked. "Explain that again." Yesterday evening, after being confronted about the Riverview Holdings partnership, Richard transferred $3 million from the company reserve account to Westlake Partners, his personal investment vehicle, Jack explained. This morning, he used those funds as collateral for new financing from First Western Bank, at terms we consider predatory, 12% interest, secured by already leveraged properties. The boardroom erupted in concerned murmurs. The chairman raised a hand for silence. "And where is Richard now?" he asked. Jack hesitated. "We don't know. He and Diane left their home last night without informing anyone of their destination. They've been in limited contact by phone only." "This is unprecedented," the chairman said, clearly struggling to process the magnitude of the situation. "Richard has led this company for 40 years. For him to take such actions suggests a concerning breakdown in governance." I stepped forward then, taking over the presentation to outline the restructuring plan Jack and I had developed. The board listened attentively as I walked through the necessary asset sales, operational changes, and strategic repositioning that could save Reynolds Realty. In summary, I concluded, the company can survive and eventually thrive again, but only with immediate, decisive action. The plan requires selling several signature properties, including Riverside Plaza, reducing executive overhead, and refocusing on mid-market commercial properties where Reynolds has historically shown the strongest performance. As I finished speaking, the boardroom door opened unexpectedly. All heads turned to see Thomas Braddock enter, a well-dressed man in his late 60s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "My apologies for the interruption," he said smoothly, nodding to the chairman. "Richard, Reynolds asked me to represent his interests in this meeting, as he is currently unavailable." Jack stiffened beside me. "Mr. Braddock has a direct conflict of interest in these proceedings," he stated firmly. "As we've just disclosed, he holds a substantial undeclared partnership interest in Riverside Plaza through Riverview Holdings." Braddock's practiced smile didn't waver. "A legitimate business arrangement established years ago with proper approvals. Approvals that weren't transparent to the current board," the silver-haired board member observed sharply. "Be that as it may," Braddock continued, "I'm here to inform you that the immediate financial crisis has been resolved. First Western has extended a $15 million facility to Reynolds Realty, sufficient to cover the Westchester loan and provide operating capital through the next quarter, at predatory terms that will only deepen the company's financial hole," I interjected. Braddock's gaze shifted to me, his expression cooling. "Mrs. Chen Reynolds, while I understand you've provided some financial analysis, banking terms are my area of expertise. The arrangement is entirely standard for a company in transition. 12% interest secured by underwater properties is not standard," I countered. "It's opportunistic lending to a desperate borrower." The board chairman cleared his throat. "While we appreciate Mr. Braddock's update, this meeting will proceed as scheduled. The board needs to consider all options, including the restructuring plan presented by Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Chen Reynolds." Braddock nodded, taking a seat at the far end of the conference table. His presence altered the dynamic in the room, introducing an element of Richard's authority even in his absence. For the next hour, the board engaged in intense discussion, asking pointed questions about both the restructuring plan and the new financing. Jack fielded most queries, occasionally deferring to me on specific financial details. Braddock interjected, periodically, always emphasizing Richard's long-term vision and record of success through previous market cycles. As the discussion continued, my phone buzzed with a text. Glancing down discreetly, I saw Lily's name. "Mom, Grandma Diane is at our house. She's really upset. What should I do?" I felt a chill run through me. Showing Mark the message, I excused myself briefly from the meeting. In the hallway, I called Lily immediately. "Are you alone with her?" I asked without preamble. "Yes," Lily replied, her voice low. "She just showed up crying. She won't tell me where Grandpa is, but she keeps saying everything's falling apart. Is she stable?" I chose my words carefully, mindful of Diane's history of mixing anxiety medication with alcohol. "I think so. Just really upset. She asked for you specifically." That surprised me. "For me? Not your dad?" "For you. She said you're the only one who would understand." I glanced back at the boardroom, where critical decisions about Reynolds Realty's future were being made. "Tell her I'll be there as soon as I can. Don't let her leave, okay? And Lily, be careful what you say. Everything is very complicated right now." "I gathered that much," my daughter replied dryly. "Hurry, Mom. She's kind of scaring me." I returned to the boardroom and whispered the situation to Mark and Jack. Both looked alarmed. "You should go," Jack said immediately. "This could be important. She might know where Dad is and what he's planning." "But the board meeting, I can handle it," Jack assured me. "They've seen the restructuring plan. Now it's just a matter of convincing them to act on it despite Braddock's presence." Mark stood. "I'll come with you." The board chairman looked up as we moved toward the door. "Mrs. Chen Reynolds? Is everything all right?" "Family emergency," I explained briefly. "Jack has all the information you need to proceed. I'll be available by phone if additional questions arise." We left the gleaming downtown office tower and drove quickly through morning traffic toward our home in the southeast neighborhood. Mark was unusually quiet during the drive, his expression tense. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm wondering what Diane wants with you specifically," he admitted. "In 16 years, she's never sought you out for anything. Maybe this crisis has shown her who she can actually rely on," I suggested, though I shared his skepticism. Mark shook his head. "Diane doesn't change that fundamentally, even in crisis. She's never seen you as an ally, just an interloper who took her son away from the family business." "Well, we're about to find out," I replied as we pulled into our driveway. Lily met us at the door, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "She's in the living room," she whispered. "I gave her tea, but she hasn't touched it." Diane Reynolds sat perched on the edge of our sofa, still wearing the expensive cashmere coat she must have traveled in. Her normally perfect appearance was disrupted, makeup slightly smudged, hair not quite in place. She looked up as we entered, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "There you are," she said, addressing me directly while barely acknowledging Mark. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You're in my home, upset, with my daughter," I replied evenly. "Of course I came." Diane nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "Responsibility. That's always been your way, hasn't it? Taking responsibility while Richard and I didn't." The admission was so unexpected that I momentarily lost my composure. Mark looked equally stunned. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Where's Dad?" "Hong Kong," she replied simply. "Or on his way there. The Reynolds have banking connections in Asia going back decades. He thinks he can raise capital there to save the company, on his terms, without selling anything." "That's not possible," I said, taking a seat across from her. The company's financial position is too precarious for conventional financing anywhere. The only offers he'll get will be predatory like Braddock's. I know. Diane's admission hung in the air between us. That's why I didn't go with him. Mark leaned forward. You left Dad? After 45 years of marriage? Diane straightened her shoulders, some of her usual composure returning. Not permanently, but I couldn't support this. This desperate scramble to avoid reality. Not anymore. She turned to me. You were right, Abigail. About everything. The company's financial condition. Richard's refusal to adapt. The partnerships he concealed. How do you know about those? I asked, surprised by her knowledge of company details. I've been married to Richard for 45 years, she replied with a hint of her usual condescension. I know far more about Reynolds Realty than anyone suspects, including Richard sometimes. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas. Why come to me, Diane? Why not go to Jack, who's in the middle of an emergency board meeting right now trying to save the company? Because Jack is too close to it all, too enmeshed in the company politics. She met my gaze directly. And because I need someone who understands what it means to protect family above all else, even when it means standing against your spouse. The parallel wasn't lost on me. How I'd stood firm against Mark's parents for years to protect our family's integrity, just as Diane was now standing apart from Richard to protect what remained of the Reynolds legacy. What exactly are you asking? Of me, Diane. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a flash drive. Evidence. Records Richard kept of all his private arrangements, not just Riverview Holdings, but half a dozen similar partnerships. Documentation of questionable accounting practices going back years. Everything the board needs to take control away from him before he destroys everything trying to save it. Mark stared at his mother in disbelief. You're betraying Dad? After defending him all these years? Diane's expression hardened. I'm saving him from himself, Mark, and saving what can be saved of the company for you, for Jack, for Lily. Richard can't see past his pride to understand what truly matters. I accepted the flash drive, turning it over in my hand. Why did you collect this information? Insurance, she replied simply. I've watched Richard become increasingly erratic in his business decisions over the past few years, taking bigger risks, ignoring warning signs, dismissing Jack's concerns. I started keeping records in case something like this happened. Does Richard know you have this? No. He believes these records exist only in his private files. A flash of something like satisfaction crossed her face. He never considered that I might understand the importance of documentation. I glanced at Mark, seeing the conflict in his expression. This was his mother asking us to help remove his father from control of the company he'd built. A family drama of Shakespearean proportions playing out in our living room. The board is meeting now, I said. This information could be decisive. Diane nodded. That's why I brought it to you. You're the only one I trust to use it responsibly, to save the company without unnecessarily destroying Richard in the process. That's quite a change in perspective, I observed, still, wary of her sudden faith in my judgment. You've spent 16 years treating me like an unwelcome intruder in the Reynolds family. Yes, she acknowledged without apology. Because I believed what Richard believed. That you married Mark for his name, his connections, his inheritance. That your ambitions were self-serving. And now? Now I've seen you build a successful business on your own terms. I've seen you raise a remarkable daughter with strong values. I've seen you offer your expertise to save a company that has treated you with nothing but disdain. Diane's voice cracked slightly. And I've seen you do all of this while maintaining your integrity, something the Reynolds family has been sorely lacking. Mark reached for his mother's hand, a gesture of connection I'd rarely witnessed between them. Mom, are you sure about this? Once we use this information, there's no going back. Dad will see it as the ultimate betrayal. I'm sure, Diane replied, her voice steadying. Richard made his choice when he boarded that plane rather than face reality. Now I'm making mine. I stood, flash drive in hand. I'll take this to Jack immediately. The board needs to see it before making any decisions. I'm coming with you, Diane announced, rising to her feet with the regal bearing that was second nature to her. The board should hear directly from me why I'm providing this information. Mark looked between us, clearly trying to process this unexpected alliance. I'll come too. Lily, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped forward. What about me? I want to help too. Diane turned to her granddaughter, genuine warmth softening her features. You already have, dear. You gave me tea and compassion when I arrived in a state. And your research project on Reynolds Realty was what first made me realize how serious the company's problems had become. Lily's eyes widened. Really? But I just did that for school. With more insight than most of Richard's highly paid consultants, Diane observed, the Reynolds women have always been underestimated. Perhaps it's time to change that. 20 minutes later, we arrived back at Reynolds Realty headquarters. The board meeting was still in progress, judging by the closed conference room doors. When we entered, Diane leading the way with Mark, Lily and me following, the conversation halted abruptly. Jack's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to cautious hope as he registered his mother's presence. Braddock, by contrast, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Diane, the board chairman acknowledged, this is unexpected. Necessary, Thomas. Diane's voice carried the authority of decades as the company founder's wife. I have information the board needs before making any decisions about Reynolds Realty's future. I handed the flash drive to Jack, who connected it to the presentation system. What followed was a methodical exposure of Richard's secret financial arrangements. Not just Riverview Holdings, but multiple partnerships with investors, bankers, and developers, all structured to benefit Richard personally while potentially compromising the company's interests. Braddock grew increasingly agitated as the presentation continued, eventually standing to leave. This is a family vendetta, not a legitimate board meeting. I refuse to participate further. Sit down, Tom, Diane commanded with surprising force. Your partnership with Richard through Riverview Holdings is only the tip of the iceberg. Would you like me to detail the terms of your arrangement regarding the Westbrook properties as well? I have those records too. Braddock paled visibly, slowly resuming his seat. Mother, Jack said carefully, how did you obtain these records? I've been married to your father for 45 years, she repeated her earlier explanation. I pay attention, especially when Richard began behaving erratically in his business decisions. The board chairman cleared his throat. While this information is concerning, I must ask about Richard's whereabouts and whether he's aware you're sharing these documents. Richard is currently en route to Hong Kong, attempting to secure alternative financing that would only deepen the company's financial problems, Diane replied crisply. And no, he's not aware I'm sharing this information. He believes these arrangements should remain private, regardless of their impact on the company's future. The silver-haired board member who had spoken earlier leaned forward. Why are you doing this, Diane? After standing by Richard all these years? Diane's composure wavered slightly. Because I love my husband enough to stop him from destroying everything he's built. Because I love my sons and my granddaughter enough to preserve what can be saved of their inheritance. And because, despite appearances, I've always cared more about the Reynolds legacy than about Richard's pride. Her sincerity was unmistakable, lending a moral authority to the proceedings that might otherwise have been dismissed as a family coup. The board members exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation in light of this unexpected intervention from the person closest to Richard. In light of this new information, the chairman finally said, I believe the board needs to consider immediate action to stabilize the company's governance and financial position. What followed was a surprisingly efficient series of decisions. The board voted unanimously to implement the restructuring plan Jack and I had developed. Richard was temporarily removed from operational control, with Jack appointed as acting CEO. A special committee was formed to investigate the undisclosed partnerships and determine appropriate remedial actions. Through it all, Diane remained composed, occasionally adding context to specific arrangements when questioned by board members. Her intimate knowledge of Richard's dealings impressed even those who had known him for decades. As the meeting concluded, the chairman addressed us directly. "This has been extraordinary in every sense. The board appreciates the courage it took to bring these matters forward, especially given the family relationships involved." Braddock departed without a word, his usual confidence shattered by the revelations. The remaining board members filed out, leaving just our family, Jack, Mark, Lily, Diane, and me, in the suddenly quiet conference room. "Well," Jack said, breaking the silence. "That was definitive." "What happens now?" Lily asked, looking between the adults with concern. "What about Grandpa?" Diane moved to the window, gazing out at the Portland skyline Richard had helped shape over decades. "Your grandfather will be very angry when he learns what's happened. He'll feel betrayed, outmaneuvered, disrespected. He was all those things to the company and its shareholders," Jack pointed out. "His actions left us no choice." "I know," Diane acknowledged. "But understanding that intellectually doesn't prepare you for Richard Reynolds in full righteousness mode." "Will he come back?" Mark asked. Diane turned from the window. "Eventually, once he realizes his Asian connections won't provide the miracle financing he's seeking, once his pride has been wounded deeply enough that he feels the need to confront us directly." "And then?" I asked. "Then we face whatever comes next. Together." Diane's gaze moved between her sons, then to Lily, and finally, surprisingly, to me. As a family, however reconfigured that family might be. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jack took over as acting CEO, implementing the first phase of the restructuring plan with remarkable efficiency. I provided ongoing advisory support, working closely with the financial team to prioritize debt reduction and operational streamlining. Mark returned to his teaching, but stayed more connected to company affairs than he had in years, offering historical perspective that proved valuable during the transition. Lily threw herself into learning about the business, spending afternoons at the headquarters after school, absorbing everything from property management to financial reporting. Diane, perhaps most surprisingly, became an unexpected ally in the restructuring. Her social connections proved invaluable in smoothing relationships with nervous investors and partners. Her intimate knowledge of Richard's decision-making patterns helped anticipate and address potential roadblocks. Richard remained in Asia, communicating only through terse emails to his attorneys. The legal challenges we had anticipated materialized in a flurry of threatened lawsuits, all claiming various forms of misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. None progressed beyond the threat stage once the attorneys reviewed the documentation Diane had provided. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I was working late at Harvest Table, reviewing staffing schedules for the new Pearl District location, when my phone rang. The international number gave me pause. "Abigail Chen Reynolds," I answered cautiously. "You've won." Richard's voice was clear despite the distance, the bitterness unmistakable. "Congratulations on destroying what took me 40 years to build." I took a deep breath, refusing to be baited. "Reynolds Realty isn't destroyed, Richard. It's being saved, transformed into something that can survive in today's market. Your legacy preserved, even if your pride isn't." "My legacy," he scoffed. A scaled-down, risk-averse shadow of what Reynolds Realty once was. Selling off landmark properties, retreating from the luxury market, managed by committee instead of vision. Managed sustainably, I corrected, with transparency and proper governance. The changes are working, Richard. The Westchester loan has been repaid. The Riverside Plaza sale is in progress. The company will survive. A long silence followed. When Richard spoke again, his tone had shifted from bitterness to something more complex, resignation tinged with curiosity. "Diane," he said finally, "I didn't expect her to turn against me, to provide the evidence that made all this possible." "She didn't turn against you," I replied carefully. "She acted to protect what matters most, the company's future, your son's inheritance, Lily's trust fund. She did what you couldn't bring yourself to do." Another silence. "And you? What was your motivation in all this? Revenge for years of perceived slights? The satisfaction of being proven right?" "Professional integrity," I stated simply. "Jack asked for my expertise, and I provided it. The company needed restructuring, and I helped design a viable plan. Nothing more, nothing less." "You expect me to believe your involvement wasn't personal? After 16 years of tension between us?" "Believe what you want, Richard, but ask yourself this. If I were motivated by revenge, would I have structured a plan that saves the company? That preserves the Reynolds name and legacy? That ensures your son succeeds you as CEO rather than bringing in outside management?" For once, Richard seemed to have no immediate retort. I pressed the advantage of his silence. "Come home, Richard. Not to reclaim control, that ship has sailed, but to be part of the company's transformation, to offer your experience and knowledge in service of its future, not its past." "Why would I do that?" he asked, genuine bewilderment in his voice. "Return to a company that's rejected my leadership? To a family that's betrayed my trust?" "Because it's still your life's work," I replied. "Because Jack and Mark, despite everything, still value your wisdom, if not your recent decisions. Because Lily deserves to know her grandfather beyond the corporate power struggles. And because Diane misses you, even while standing firm on the need for change." "Diane?" he repeated, softening slightly at her name. "She's still at the house?" "Yes. She goes to the office daily, helping Jack navigate the social and political dimensions of the transition. She's been remarkably effective." "She always was," Richard admitted, a note of pride creeping into his voice. "Smarter than most of my executives, though she never sought recognition for it." "Perhaps that's something else that needs to change," I suggested. Richard fell silent again, contemplation replacing hostility. "I need to think," he finally said, "about all of this." "Take your time," I replied. "The company isn't going anywhere. Neither is your family." 3 days later, Richard Reynolds returned to Portland. He didn't come storming into the headquarters, demanding reinstatement or threatening further legal action as we had feared. Instead, he went home to Diane, and they talked, really talked, for the first time in years, according to what she later told Mark. A week after his return, Richard requested a meeting with Jack, Mark, and me. We gathered in his home office, the shrine to past business glory now feeling more like a museum than a seat of power. Richard looked older, the lines in his face deeper, but his eyes were clear and engaged as he addressed us. "I've spent considerable time reviewing the restructuring plan and the current company status," he began formally. "I have observations to share." For the next hour, he offered detailed, thoughtful analysis of the changes underway. He questioned certain decisions, suggested refinements to others, and surprisingly, acknowledged the wisdom of several core components of the plan. It was Richard Reynolds at his best, strategic, insightful, experienced, without the blind spots of pride and resistance to change that had created the crisis. "You've done well," he concluded, the admission clearly difficult for him. "The company will survive. albeit in a different form than I envisioned. Jack, you've shown leadership I wasn't certain you possessed. Mark, your perspective from outside. The industry has provided valuable balance to the discussions. And Abigail. He paused, our eyes meeting across the room. Your financial analysis was impeccable. The restructuring plan, sound. I would have designed it differently, but I cannot fault its effectiveness. Coming from Richard Reynolds, this constituted extraordinary praise. I acknowledged it with a simple nod, unwilling to risk breaking the fragile truce with unnecessary words. I would like to offer my services to the board in an advisory capacity, Richard continued. Not as CEO, not as executive chairman, simply as someone with 40 years of experience in this market and this industry. Jack glanced at me, then at Mark, before responding. I think that could be very valuable, Dad, especially as we enter the third phase of the restructuring, repositioning the company for sustainable growth. Richard nodded, a hint of his old confidence returning. I have some thoughts on that phase. Strategic opportunities in emerging markets that align with the new direction while maintaining the Reynolds standard of quality. The conversation continued, evolving from formal business discussion to something closer to collaborative planning. Richard and Jack examining property portfolios, Mark offering historical context for various markets, me providing financial metrics to evaluate proposed initiatives. It wasn't perfect. Richard occasionally slipped into his authoritarian patterns, only to catch himself and moderate his approach. Tensions flared briefly over certain decisions already in motion, but the overall tone remained constructive. A family of professionals, working toward a common goal despite their complicated personal history. As we prepared to leave, Richard asked me to stay behind for a moment. Mark hesitated, protective instincts evident in his expression. It's okay, I assured him. I'll meet you at home. When we were alone, Richard studied me with new attention, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Why did you marry my son? He asked abruptly. The question caught me off guard after our hours of professional discussion. Because I loved him, I answered simply. Because he was kind, intelligent, principled. Because together, we made more sense than we did apart. Not for his name, his connections, the Reynolds legacy? I shook my head. Those were obstacles to overcome, not attractions. I fell in love with Mark despite his family, not because of it. Richard absorbed this, nodding slowly. And now, 16 years, one daughter, and countless family tensions later, now I love him more, I replied, honestly. For standing by me through your disapproval, for supporting my ambitions while pursuing his own, for being exactly who he is, a Reynolds who defined success on his own terms, not yours. For the first time in our long, fraught relationship, Richard Reynolds offered me something resembling a genuine smile. You know, Abigail, in another life, I think we might have been allies rather than adversaries. You have qualities I've always respected in business associates: determination, intelligence, unwavering principles. Perhaps it's not too late, I suggested, returning his smile. Cautiously, not for alliance necessarily, but for mutual respect. Perhaps not, he agreed, though I make no promises about Thanksgiving dinner. Some traditions die hard. I laughed despite myself. Fair enough. One crisis at a time. As I left the Reynolds estate, driving back to the modest craftsman home where my own family waited, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with that tense Thanksgiving dinner barely a month earlier. The gold digger accusation that had triggered 16 years of suppressed resentment. The financial crisis that had forced long overdue confrontations. The unlikely alliances that had emerged from shared priorities despite personal differences. The Reynolds family would never be simple or entirely comfortable. Richard would always battle his pride. Diane would always maintain certain social pretensions. But something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how they saw me, but in how they saw themselves and each other. As I pulled into our driveway, I spotted Mark and Lily through the front window, setting the dinner table together, laughing at some shared joke. My restaurant thrived downtown, expanding into new locations. Reynolds Realty was transforming into a more sustainable enterprise under Jack's leadership with Richard's grudging guidance. Everything that truly mattered was secure. Not because I'd proven the gold digger accusations wrong, though I had. Not because I'd shown them who really paid for dinner, though that revelation had been satisfying. But because I'd remained true to my values throughout, prioritizing substance over appearance, integrity over approval, family over fortune. In the end, that was the most powerful response to years of judgment. Not revenge or vindication, but simply living well on my own terms. And finally, even Richard and Diane Reynolds were beginning to understand the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.